Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and time for the June 21st meeting of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County. Jeffrey Smith, the Chief Deputy Clerk of the Court, is going to say the invocation, which will be followed by the pledge, led by Commissioner Joseph Fletcher.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. We come to you with humble hearts, seeking your guidance and your strength and your compassion during these proceedings, Lord. This day, let the words that be spoken be the truth and civility reign, Lord. And Lord, we ask a special blessing on all our troops, wherever they may be, Lord, that are protecting our right to meet today. And Lord, we also thank you for bringing Commissioner Wheeler back to us, safe and sound and healthy. Lord, we ask these things in your precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Please join with me in the pledge of allegiance to the greatest nation on earth.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under additions and deletions to the agenda, the County Administrator is asked to add item 12E, an information item on the pensions. And it's basically because the new pension laws passed by the state start into effect July 1st, and we won't have another meeting until after that. Does anybody else have any other additions or deletions?
Move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner O'Brien, a second from Commissioner Davis. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Next up is a proclamation and presentation on hurricane preparedness by John King, the Director of the Indian River County Emergency Services Department. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Commissioners. And for the record, my name is John King, Emergency Services Director. Thank you, Commissioner. I guess I want to start off by saying with Indian River County experiencing the worst drought in 60 years, and it's very difficult to travel anywhere in the state and spite a county that doesn't have a brush fire right now, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we're in hurricane season. And that wet season will come. And I'll also say that when many of us are praying for rain, I'd like to qualify those prayers and make sure that we have light breezes to accompany all that rain, because that's certainly what we need. Hurricane season is from June 1st through the last day of November, and last year was the third busiest hurricane season on record. We don't think much about that. We had 19 named storms last year, but only one tropical depression, Bonnie, actually moved through South Florida. So though it was quite active, most of them stayed offshore. And these tropical storms that come in, most people seem to lose sight of the fact that about 25% of the water we consume in the state of Florida every year actually comes from these tropical depressions. Agriculture, shallow wells, were very dependent upon having these rainfalls to increase the water table. So what's going to happen this coming year? Hurricane season, the outlook is that NOAA predicts an active hurricane season. In fact, they're suggesting somewhere between 12 and 18 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. Probably one of the best minds and research that's going on right now, the group that has the greatest reputation by percentage of accuracy is in Colorado State University, and they're suggesting that we're going to have 16 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. Major hurricanes means it's a category 3, 4, or 5. And so there's several factors that cause this to happen. And the first is that we have a weakening El Nino, which occurs in the Pacific. That usually, when it's strong, it kind of hinders some of the storms. As it weakens, it begins to allow the Atlantic to develop. The Atlantic Ocean is a little warmer than it was last year. We have weakening trade winds and higher humidity. So there's every probability, if there's a trend, that we're going to have an active season this year. And people often ask me this whole question about how many hurricanes, how many are going to impact Florida. And I remind everybody that it's not how many hurricanes you have, it's how many visit your neighborhood. If you think back to 1992, Hurricane Andrew, A for Andrew, the first storm of this season, it didn't arrive until sometime in August. And it was probably the only significant hurricane of that year. And for those of us that live in the Indian River County area, 24 hours, less than 24 hours before Andrew made landfall in Dade County, the National Weather Service said that the eye of that storm was going to make landfall in Vero Beach. So though we were quite thankful it didn't hit here, it unfortunately hit somewhere else, and we had very minimal damage from that storm. People ask, should I be prepared to evacuate? And how do I know if I have to evacuate? And I often tell people there's an easy way to tell if you live in Florida if you might have to evacuate. You just walk to the rear of your car, and if you have a Florida tag, you might have to evacuate. It can't be any simpler than that. It may be from a storm event. It may be from a wildfire. It may be from a transportation accident with chemicals, over-the-road chemicals. So everybody needs to have an evacuation plan. It's very important you do. But we're talking about hurricanes today, and so residents who live on the barrier island, we tell them that it's very probable that if we have a storm making landfall from the Atlantic Ocean onshore, you may have to evacuate. That doesn't mean you're going to have storm tides inside your house, but many of the roads that you would use to evacuate may be impeded. It's going to, perhaps when the bridges have to shut down because the winds get to be more than 40 miles an hour, it makes it very difficult to provide services to you. Another group, if you live in manufactured homes, you need to have an evacuation plan. If last time we had 4 inches of rain and you walked to your car and you got wet socks, you probably need to have a plan as well, because we have areas that are not on the beach that are prone to ponding water, and you may have to evacuate for that as well. And so generally speaking, during hurricane season, if you live east of US 1, you need to have an emergency plan. And we tell people that you don't always have to evacuate hundreds or thousands of miles. You maybe only have to evacuate tens of miles. And we tell people that other options are go stay with a friend who has a house that's relative. If it's a smaller hurricane, go stay with a friend that has a newer home built to the current standards that has all the shutters, and perhaps they have a generator. You may not have to go that far. Or another thing that you could possibly do is leave the area. But if you're going to leave the area, leave well ahead of time and make sure you know where you're going. Getting on the road and just driving aimlessly to some destination is not usually a good experience. And so as you go through the list, we tell people that going to a Red Cross shelter, which is we work with the schools and we work with the Red Cross and other private nonprofits throughout the county to help put these public shelters, make them available. But we tell people that when you get there, if you didn't bring certain items with you, you're probably not going to have them when you get there. They're not going to a motel. They're going to a shelter of last resort. So with that, how do you know what's going to happen? Hurricanes just don't happen 50 miles off the coast and roll in. There's enough information out there from NOAA Weather Radio, the television, the newspaper. The county has email lists, which we encourage you, if you go to the county's webpage, ircgov.com, on the very front page, there's a way that you can sign up for email lists. We also have the same information on IRCES, short for In River County Emergency Services.com. You can sign up for that information. We're also, with the help of Scott and Adam from the Computer Services Group, we're trying to become a little more computer savvy, because your NOAA Weather Radio is often at your house, but you're in your car and you're somewhere else. And so most of us have phones now that are capable of receiving text messages. They're capable of receiving a great deal of information, both from the commercial media and from our community notification systems. Twitter is up and running this year, and we don't send out messages every day, only when it's important to Indian River County. Facebook is another means. Facebook is one way only, so don't send us something back on Facebook and try to get information from us. We're just sending information out in that regard.
John, is there a way of changing that in the event we want to? For example, let's suppose that, sorry about that.
That's a good question.
Let's suppose that, I understand, just when we're sending information out, but let's suppose a catastrophe happens. And basically that may be quite frankly, that was probably the first line of communication that came back, if I'm not mistaken. And for somebody to be able to communicate to officials after the storm, is there a way of us undoing? And I don't know if we should or shouldn't, but it seems like to me it'd be nice if somebody had a question about what to do or who to talk to about a situation. That'd be a lot more efficient than using a phone.
That's a very good question, but let me suggest another option to you. What we have been doing for hurricane season and for other disasters is we populate a great deal of information on the county's webpage. So you don't have to be in Indian River County. If you evacuated to Orlando and you want to find out what the conditions are in Indian River County, you can go right to our webpage. And we put it there because some people don't even have cable vision at their house. And so if you have internet, then you can get the information. The other thing that we also have is we have people who are trained in answering these questions. So if you're not getting the information that you need electronically, you can actually talk to somebody in a room that's at the EOC, that has the most current information, and sometimes those questions also come with a special need. And I'm in a better position to try to provide those needs and services out of the EOC than from another part of the complex here.
And I'm clear on that, but that's exactly my point is, how do they talk to that person? Typically it's with a phone call, right?
It is.
Is there a way of allowing the electronic communications to the what do they call them, EFS?
ESFs, yes. We actually do have somebody that's on the computer that can email information back and forth.
Okay.
You're limited when you use Facebook and you use Twitter. Sometimes you're limited to a smaller size packet, and it may be a greater amount of information.
Okay.
We want people to feel comfortable about calling in. I know at my age sometimes when I get frustrated with the phone automated system, I want to talk to a human being. And so we try to meet that need by having somebody who can talk to you and get you an answer.
Right, but I mean, I guess really on Facebook, I've got a Facebook, and also my email address is on there, so it's it's a convenient way of communicating back and forth if we offer that as in the aftermath of a storm.
I would suggest you will certainly explore that a little bit further. We haven't gone that far yet. We're still new into the Facebook and the Twitter.
Me too.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just to follow up, John, I think maybe Commissioner Davis was referring to is after the tornadoes in Joplin, that people searching for missing relatives use Facebook extensively.
Yes.
And reached a network of people that said, oh no, Grandma's staying with me, and I think maybe that's more what you were thinking as far as that two-way communication.
Yeah, I was thinking directly more communication with the county, but that's another layer that.
Yeah, so maybe just find out a little bit more about that, how they did it and how it worked, but I think that would be something that we should be able to incorporate if we do get hit with something bad.
Looks like Mr. Brown would like to speak.
I could add something to that. For the record, Jason Brown, County Budget Director. Currently, our social networking policy of the county only allows for one-way communication on Facebook. We have various reasons for that, legal concerns of what might be posted back and public record things of that nature. So for normal operations, we don't have two-way communications. If we decided we needed to do that after a storm, we could do. We've got the technological capability to do that. There's nothing standing in our way. Mm-hmm. So if the Joplin, Missouri case, I've heard of that. There's also was a recent case of a lady who fell in her home and broke her leg, I think, and she was only able to. She couldn't get to the phone, but she could post something on Facebook, and her daughter-in-law found it out. One thing we would have to consider is if we're receiving two-way communications, we'd have to commit resources to make sure somebody was monitoring all that information, because that lady who fell in her home, her daughter-in-law found out. It was 10 hours later as she lay there with a broken femur. So obviously it wasn't a perfect situation. It was better than there was, but we could accomplish that. There's no technological reason standing in our way. It'd just be a matter of making the call.
Go ahead.
I would just say that also at that point, the county administrator would have probably declared a state of emergency, and we could supersede our normal policies to allow that. I'm sure that's
exactly where I was going with it. I think that ought to be almost as soon as we designate him in charge during the emergency, that we have. I don't know whether we need to have a policy change or how that would be. So basically, whenever we say go, he can make the decision when or if it's appropriate.
It might be to his discretion. Like
That's what
if
I'm
a hurricane comes close.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but if we get a direct hit or a tornado or something, we open it up.
And I don't know whether we need to change policy or that's just administrative.
I think we could supersede that policy during a declared emergency without a problem.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I think after most every emergency, we have to bend the rules just to fix certain things every time.
We never let a rule get.
Just try to make sure that we make good decisions when we do that.
Don't let our new assistant county attorney hear that, Commissioner Davis. She's made it a week so far. Let's try to get two out of her.
I was still can do whatever I want on my last day, so. Anyway, let's get back to the presentation, if I may. I know time is important here. We have 12 public shelters, and we normally when we open shelters, we open one in the South County, one in the Central County, one in the North County, and one in the Western County. We don't always announce those ahead of time because the school district is often doing their facility maintenance projects during those same summer sessions. They could have their roof off the kitchen, perhaps, and so that may not be the shelter that we would use this time, even though a month before or a month after would be the great shelter to use. But we have shelters Everybody knows where they are. They're on the web page, the information, everything that you want to know about hurricane season, how to prepare for hurricane season, where the shelters are, how to plan ahead of time, how to develop a family plan. That information is readily available to you. We have two shelters I'd like to focus in on as a pet-friendly shelter at Liberty Magnet. We're working with the school district and the Humane Society and the Red Cross and Emergency Management have worked very diligently. Etta Lopresti and Rachel Ivy in my office have spent a great deal of time working on this pet-friendly shelter. And we encourage people, we know that people may not evacuate if they can't take their pet with them. And so here's an opportunity to try to resolve some of those concerns. But there's like a registration process so that when somebody arrives with their pet, we know their pet has had the appropriate shots and they bring the sometimes the medications and food, and that's provided by the owner. And we have a special needs shelter, and there's certain people in this community that need daily cardiac assessments. They need care and assistance taking their daily medications. And there's those people that are on oxygen, and the oxygen units require electricity, which may be not working in their neighborhood during or shortly after a storm. So we have a special needs shelter. There's registration for that as well. So we tell people to be prepared, have a family plan. I think it's the most important thing is, and we've been preaching this for some time, is have a plan, know if you live in an evacuation area, have a hurricane survival kit, shutters and bracing for your garage doors, do a great deal for the survivability of your residents, and monitor the weather conditions daily. For most of us that have a smartphone, those services are free. You can have them go right to your phone. They can tell you everything from what the wind direction is going to be to what's the probability of rain today or how far a severe weather event is from your location, from your zip code. And we tell people the two most important things for hurricane season is have a family plan and know a weather radio. They're relatively inexpensive. Most of them are under $20. You can spend as much as $40 for a fancy one, but the information is just greatly valuable, and it goes beyond just weather radio. They also give us information. They can alert a community about. We had a discussion yesterday about tsunamis. That information would come through on your emergency alert system through your no weather radio, and even evacuations for wildfires. So. In a nutshell, I would just suggest to you that even though it's dry outside right now, there's every indication that sometime in August and September, the National Weather Service is expecting a change to a more wet climate. And so I think we'll take as much rain as we can get, just keep the winds as light as possible. Do you have any other questions for me?
John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
John, is this going to be available on the county's website if somebody wanted to go to it, or how would we?
This information, very good, is on, if you go to the county's webpage, right on the front page, there's a way to get to the emergency management office, and there's just more information you can read in a day.
Good.
Or you can call us at the office, and it's just 226-3900. Just give us a call, and we'll have all the information you could possibly want. And if there's a civic group or some type of homeowners association that would like for us to come out and specifically talk to your group, we're welcome to do that too. We're happy to do that.
Okay, super.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chief.
Next, I'd like to note that this county commission likes to have as much audience participation as possible. We love it when citizens come and visit us. We especially like it when young adults come. And I noticed there's some scouts in the audience, and I was wondering if one of them might want to come up and tell us why you're here today, and if it's for a civic project or something else. I'll notice that one of them looks like he's on his way to being an Eagle Scout.
Yes.
I bet you all of them are. They just don't know it yet.
Up to the podium, if you'll give us your name and address and your rank for the record.
Hi, I'm Joe Granberg. I'm from Troop 567. I'm a Life Scout, and I'm here. I'm working on a communications merit badge, and one of the requirements is you have to visit a city board meeting or anything.
Now, thank you very much for coming. I will note that it seems like scouts get a lot more in the way of citizenship as they're going through the ranks than most of the young people in America today. I think that is a good thing and bodes well for the future of America. So thank you for being a scout, and good luck on your way to becoming an Eagle Scout.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, how old are you, sir?
13.
13, and you're a Life Scout.
Yep.
One rank below Eagle Scout. No. We'll see you again real soon, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to as an aside, I mean, y'all are quite frankly seeing the most boring part of what we do, I think. But if you wanted to see the inner workings behind everything, I had the opportunity to take the student government at Sebastian River High School behind the scenes and show them how we do the traffic coordination, over where the taxpayer, where you'll get your driver's license. If as a group y'all would like to have a tour like that, just get with us. We'll be more than happy to open up the administration complex and let you kind of go through it and see the behind the scenes work that takes place.
All right, thank you.
Next up, we have the approval of the meeting minutes for May 17th and May 24th.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move approval for the regular meeting minutes for the May 17, 2011, as well as the regular meeting of May 24, 2011.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fletcher for both meeting minutes, a second from Commissioner Davis. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Next up, we have the consent agenda. Any changes or any items that anybody wants pulled from the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Davis, a second from Commissioner Fletcher. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Next up, we have constitutional officers and government agencies. Sheriff Law on the fiscal year 2011 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Davis, a second from Commissioner Fletcher. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Next up, we have a public hearing, and this is a public hearing for St. Augustine of Canterbury Episcopal Church's request for a special exception use approval for a church facility expansion. And I will note that this is a quasi-judicial hearing, and we've got a wonderful special procedure to go through the quasi-judicial proceedings. First up, I'll ask any commissioners to disclose any ex parte communications, site visits, or other investigations concerning this matter. I'll start on my left, Commissioner Wheeler.
None. Other than the backup in the agenda, none.
And none for me?
I didn't speak to anybody, but I did drive by the site, and obviously the backup agenda. Is that what you mean?
Well, I don't think with the backup agenda, but the other drive by the site you can mention.
Yes, I must confess I drove by it.
Okay, Commissioner Fletcher.
Did you look? Close your eyes.
Pray.
None, sir, other than the backup agenda, which is public record.
Okay, thank you. We have disclosed any communications. Next up, I will open the public hearing. And if the clerk could collectively swear in all witnesses, please.
You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, the county staff is going to make a presentation, and I will ask that the staff admit their presentation to the clerk to be part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Stan Bowling, the County Planning Director. A couple items I would like to go over to present the item. The proposal before you all today is a special exception and request to expand an existing church, the St. Augustine of Canterbury Church. The process involves a review that applies criteria that are specific to churches in residential areas, appropriateness and compatibility. There was a staff review of the site plan that accompanied the request, mailed notice and advertisement, and a sign was posted for both public hearings that are required, one before the Planning and Zoning Commission and one before this hearing today. The Planning and Zoning Commission back on May 26th recommended approval of this project 6-0. I'll note here that with all the notice that was given, staff received no comments or questions from any surrounding property owners, so we have no objections. The board is to take final action this morning on the request to approve it, approve with conditions, or deny the request. The subject site is shaded on this map. It's located on the west side of 43rd Avenue, a little bit north of 4th Street. It's surrounded by single-family zoning, RS3, residential single-family up to 3 units per acre. And across 43rd Avenue, it's also zoned single-family, RS6. This is an aerial of the subject site. The existing facility was approved by special exception back in the early 90s and developed. It's about a 5.5 acre site. You can see it's fairly heavily wooded. There was a buffer that was established and preserved along the perimeters of the site that are there now and that are in good shape. You can also see that the existing facility, the church building, is a substantial distance from 43rd Avenue, about 165 feet. Single-family residences to the west and across 43rd Avenue to the east. Vacant property to the north and to the south is the old forestry site. The proposal for the expansion involves 3 different areas of construction: an addition on the south side of the existing sanctuary, an addition for adult education on the north side of the existing building, and a separate but closely integrated new parish hall. And the combination of those exceeds 10%, and that's why the special exception process applies in this particular case. There won't be many changes to the site itself in terms of how it's accessed. There's still a one-way loop drive system that will go through the site, and parking will be continue to be to the west or to the rear of the site. The existing dry retention stormwater areas will continue to be used, and they're sized appropriately for the expansion. As I mentioned earlier, the existing buffers around the perimeters of the site are intact, and they do not need to be augmented or upgraded. There will be some enhancements along 43rd Avenue, so actually the only trees that will need to be planted with this project will be seen from 43rd Avenue. The one condition that's part of staff's recommendation is that the applicant obtain from the fire division approval for an acceptable upgrade to the fire suppression system for the existing building as well as the additions, and the applicant's already gotten with the fire department on this, and they've applied for a building permit. The recommendation from staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission are to make the findings that are listed in staff's report, to accept staff's report as evidence that the application meets the appropriate land development regulations and comprehensive plan policies, and that the board grant a special exception approval for the expansion with the fire suppression system upgrade condition. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for staff? There being none, I'll ask if there's an applicant's presentation.
My name is Jeff Smith. I represent Mosby Smith Engineering, 610 First Street, Vero Beach, Florida, 32962. I think staff did a great job in their presentation. And if there's any other questions that you may have on the site, it's kind of straightforward, but if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Any questions of the applicant?
No.
There being none, I'll ask if there's any input from the public. Any input from the public on this matter? There being none, I'll ask for any final input from any applicant or staff or anybody else. There being none, I'll ask the board to entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Okay. Public hearing is closed, and I'll just remind you, whoever makes the motion, please include the staff recommendations and the items dealing with the special exception.
Verbatim?
Yeah, might as well.
I move to approve based on the above analysis that the empowered under provision, that much of it?
Keep going.
Okay. 971, to review the special exception applied for, and also that the conjunction of recommendations with the following conditions.
We have a motion from Commissioner Davis.
Second. Now, you may read the conditions?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay.
Second from Commissioner Flesher. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Next up, we have public discussion items. A request to speak from Fred Menzing regarding the Amtrak station. Name and address for the record, please.
Morning, Fred.
Morning, gentlemen. The important document is the first one. The second one,
Thanks, Fred.
I'll make light of briefly, but
I'll pass it down for you, Fred, if you want me to. Do you need one?
Thank
No,
you.
I have one. The one, I need one hand with the court clerk.
Well, I'll get him. Go ahead.
Okay.
We're good. And this is on
Our name's on it.
The one that says Auto Train on it is the first one I want to speak lightly about. It shows basically there are 3 trains that come to Florida at this point. You'll notice that in North Carolina, the red and blue lines get split and they join back up at Savannah. Each of these trains has a different marketing area that is picking up as a result of it, and they all wind up in Miami. The third route is the Auto Train route, which we hear of from Sanford to Lawrence, Virginia, which is Washington, D.C. And to ride on that, you have to be part of the entourage of the motor vehicle the train is carrying. Before Hurricane Katrina, we had a 4th Amtrak route in Florida, which went from Jacksonville to San Diego. That has been terminated since Katrina at New Orleans to San Diego, and I can't get any information when it's going to start up again. Basically, if you're running New York to Miami, you're looking at 24 to 28 hours on Auto Train. The one route moves a little faster than the other. One average is about 45 and the other average is about 51 miles an hour. The point that I'm coming to bring to you that I think has been missed, there was an article in the paper indicating how much money Amtrak loses. And I haven't been able to get it from Amtrak since this came out in the paper. I did contact them and it's supposedly coming. The East Coast routes have always been very marginal, break even, or a little bit cash positive. The worst one is Chicago to Seattle. Amtrak would make money or save money if you want to go from Chicago to Seattle, instead of even taking your money to buy you a first-class airline ticket. That's how corrupt the politics of running Amtrak. You have senators in the Dakotas, Idaho. We have Amtrak service, and nobody rides it. The mountains and stuff that are pretty, you go through at night. Now, we're dealing with a political situation in Washington that we can't deal with here. I am concerned that we get Amtrak service here. I think it is good for us. I think that we need to make some thought changes. Back in, I guess it was 2000, Amtrak was sort of gearing up to do this. And quietly behind the doors, Disney sabotaged, because the plan at that time was to take one of the 2 trains that you can see the routes of on the first page and divert it at Jacksonville to come down the Florida East Coast to make a better connection between the Florida East Coast and the railroad that used to be the Seaboard Airline Railroad, which is now owned by the state at West Palm, and run to Miami on the route which Tri-Rail and Amtrak share today. Disney didn't want to lose the revenue. I ride Amtrak at least once a year. Coming back from the end of selling seed clams to Virginia, I go to Florence, South Carolina, and catch a train there back to Kissimmee. It's a whole lot cheaper and a whole lot faster than flying from that part of the Carolinas back home. And it would shock you at the traffic that pours off the train in Orlando. It's like the train empties, and a whole batch more pour out at Kissimmee. And a point about Kissimmee, it's an old station like the one we have preserved here in Sebastian. Go look at it. It's taken a lot of grief from the traffic it's suffering with. Go up to St. Augustine, and I don't have a map, I can't give you directions, and go find the old BCC station that Ed Ball had built in the early 60s. Concrete block building, bare bones, all you need for a station. Florence, South Carolina was a huge station which they've turned over to a school. I think it's a college, I'm not sure. They use the yardmaster's office as a station today, and the whole building isn't as big as this room. At Southern Pines, North Carolina, which we use occasionally, going to visit my wife's family, it's an unattended station. There's a shelter there with a machine. You go in and you stick your credit card in and play with the buttons, or you play with the buttons and punch in a code that you got from the computer, and it spits a ticket out. what we have for a station, we need to consider. The other thing that I think you really need to consider is the fact that if this service gets good, Amtrak runs regular passenger trains that'll run 20 cars, 85 feet long. That's 1,700 feet of track that gets tied up without the locomotives. In Kissimmee, they tie up 2 streets for 5 minutes when that train's at the station. The new stations that I see that Amtrak has built coming down have been built where they don't tie up grade crossings. They're out sort of in the middle of nowhere. And I would suggest that the idea of a station in the city of Vero Beach be given up, and that you look at moving up somewhere between Gifford and Wabasso to get a station, and it would serve the whole county. The critical thing, if you're traveling, how do you get from the railroad station to where you're going? You either have to be picked up, or you need public transit that's there. We have some public transit here. It can be certainly modified to get Amtrak. And I'm suggesting that, one, the idea that it doesn't pay is a reason to give it up. I think it'll bring business to the area. That a promotion be done to try to have the train split in Jacksonville. That they would book certain cars and certain Pullmans in one end of the train to run the Florida East Coast. The other end of the train would go Palatka, Sanford, Kissimmee, West Palm Beach, Okeechobee, West Palm Beach, that way. And very possibly the East Coast train only needs to go to Hobe Sound or Jupiter, because Amtrak has discovered nationwide 50 miles between stations is viable for getting Amtrak, people to ride it. They'll drive 25 miles to catch a train. So, and Amtrak is not into commuting from here to Melbourne. It's long distance travel. And I'm suggesting that, this commission, reevaluate their thoughts and get back with Treasure Coast and so forth and say, we need to do this, and, we need to look at maybe trying to push some of these changes through. In May, I went to Philadelphia for a day, and I talked to some low-level officials at Amtrak. The idea of splitting a train is viable. The biggest problem that Amtrak has is a technical problem that the Florida East Coast has a different traffic signal safety system than CSX, which is where Amtrak is running. And the 2 safety signal systems are not compatible with each other. This is why if any of you rode the train, a year and a half ago or a year ago, that they ran, it had an FEC engine on the point. The lead engine controls all your diesel electric locomotives. There's no engineers in the others. It picks up signals from the track that will cause the train to stop. If the engineer doesn't, due to a red signal, it will come to a stop. If the engineer doesn't fiddle with the controls often enough, it'll sound an alarm, and the train will stop if he doesn't respond. This is the biggest technical problem. It's going to require probably the FEC supplying the motive power, or at least the lead unit, to run down here. These are my thoughts. They're there in writing. The spelling is atrocious. The reason I gave you this little document, this is an article, and on page 1, my name is mentioned about this rail car, which is still running up in Pennsylvania. It's a self-propelled 1931 rail car that I rebuilt the power plants in back in about 1970, and I have been involved indirectly with railroads. I'm involved with the steam engine group down in Fort Pierce at the present time. I've done some work back in around 2000 on the right-of-way of the FEC, and I would like to see us get Amtrak service here and get it so that this town is important. As far as Amtrak's concerned, that we have the facility here that is a decent station, and the backup so we can, load the train up both ways, and I think it would bring money to Vero Beach. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. This issue will be being discussed at the August 10th MPO meeting, so I hope you can make it then. And
if you contact me a few days ahead, I will gladly go down.
I have enough trouble managing my own calendar, so
August 10th, Fred.
I'll be happy to remind you, Fred.
Yes, if I
Appreciate
know
all this information.
If I have a schedule, I would gladly, if there's a meeting on the subject, go down. Okay.
Oh, it'll be here. It'll be in Building B.
Beg your pardon?
It'll be in Building B. It'll be in this county, in Building B.
Oh, okay.
Not
When?
down at August 10th.
It's a Wednesday.
10 o'clock.
10
August
o'clock,
10th,
Wednesday
room
the 10th.
B501 at 10 a.m.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Next up, we have county administrator matters. The school district of Indian River County has a request for a joint workshop. Mr. Baird.
Yes, they've requested to have a workshop with us, and it's up to you when. They've got some dates in here, and I know that I'm talking to some of the commissioners. They just want us to set a date, either in the proposed workshop's June 30th. They just want us to set a date to have a joint meeting.
Is there any, I remember we went to one a year or two ago, and there didn't seem to be any real purpose to the meeting. Is there any purpose to this meeting?
You know, I don't know what the purpose of it is, but I knew they do have a new administration, and I think
I look forward to it.
that in and of itself would behoove the opportunity for everybody just to sit down once again.
I think a lot of it's going to be requesting space from us. That's what I hear, which...
You don't like being a landlord.
Yeah, we've got to make sure, because we're responsible for space for all the other state agencies, state attorney, public defender, health department, all the constitutional, so you've got to be very careful with that.
So you'll be able to have time to come up with a memorandum for us prior to that meeting, so we have some idea of what we're want to be prepared for?
Well, we've got to publish an agenda about it.
Joe, I see there's 2 dates there, the July date as well as the September date.
Yeah, we would prefer the September date, actually.
And I believe that would be more appropriate since we'll be just getting through budget, and I don't know if the new administration has gotten up to speed yet. Maybe give them the opportunity as well, and we can have open discussion after we're through our budget sessions.
Yeah, the June would be very hard. The June 30th date would be very hard with my calendar, and I think the commissioners to get prepared. So I actually would prefer the September 27th date.
I move forward for the September 27th date.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fletcher for the September 7th date.
Second.
Second from Commissioner O'Brien. Any other discussion?
I don't think I'll be here on the 27th. Let me look.
Makes me more in favor
Yeah,
of it.
I'll second my second again.
I'll reinforce my first.
I really look at the minutes anyway.
I'd like some time, because on this such a short time to at least do an agenda and have and I don't see that being.
The 27th will work, Joe?
Joe, for you, the 27th?
Yes.
Okay, and Commissioner Wheeler?
I won't be here, so it works for me.
It'll probably work better for them too.
It's a workshop. It's, I don't see us
We'll
taking.
teleconference you in, don't worry.
Okay, thanks.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you. Next up, we have departmental matters, human resources, discussion of the recent state pension changes. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jim Sexton, Human Resources Director, for the record. We want to talk about some Florida retirement system changes that just are taking effect in July. As many are well aware, and our employees have probably already received some communication from the FRS system, but the legislature passed Senate Bill 2100 making some substantive changes to the FRS system. The governor signed it into law on May 26th, and the law takes effect July 1st. Now, along with many other changes, the one we'd like to address today is that the law requires employees to contribute 3% of their earnings to help fund their future retirement benefits. Because the law is effective for all compensation paid in July, the governor has recognized that there may be some inequities because some of the time paid in July will actually be worked in June. Here, like the state, here at the county, we find ourselves in the same situation where our employees will be contributing their 3% for time worked between June 24th and June 30th. Now, the governor has pledged to address this issue in his budget, although he doesn't say how he's going to do that. So basically, staff is seeking some guidance on how the county should address this inequity where the employees are actually working in June but receiving the pay in July, and therefore making their contribution of 3% on time worked in June. So
Yeah,
that's kind of-
the law goes into effect July 1 as far as the pension. And due to his changes, there's about a $600,000 savings for us from July 1 to September 30th. And next year, it's about $3.8 million. But what it does, and what we were looking at is that it actually starts taking money from employees before the July 1 date because the paycheck is cut in July.
Okay,
So what we're suggesting is maybe because there's a 17,000, basically it's 17,500. Since we have a $600,000 savings, we would, to be fair, like to compensate the employees down the road for the 17.5 because we have a $600,000 savings that they are taking out of their check
Right.
in June when it's really supposed to go in effect.
Let me ask, Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Davis.
would it not, and that's a way of handling it?
Yes.
Or how difficult would it be just to cut 2 checks?
That we looked at, that was very hard. We'd have to do it manual. We'd
Right.
also have to, we wouldn't be able to do direct deposit, and we'd have to look at all the garnishments. If an employee has garnishments, it becomes a nightmare. The other problem is we can't make up, as far as commissioners, we can't make your salary difference up because in the law it says you have a maximum annual salary. So, but there is, we could, to do that, we looked at the separate checks, and that would be, especially since we don't hold a week back, it's almost impossible or impractical to do.
Is it possible to simply gross up that week by some 3-point-some%?
Yeah, that's the 17,500 I'm talking about. Later, cut it, give the employees back that difference for the amount in June.
Yeah, but just by grossing it up, the check's up by that amount.
We don't have time to do it this paycheck, but we want to add it to another paycheck.
Okay, so if it's simply a matter of that seems a great way to do it. I'll be happy to entertain a motion to go forward that way.
Move approval.
We have a motion to go that route by Commissioner
Yes.
Fletcher. Are you clear enough on the motion, Mr. Beard?
Yes, I am.
A second from Commissioner Wheeler. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Mr. Sexton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Office of Management and Budget, the approval of an auction sale for the old fire station number 9, which is up in Sebastian, for the auction that took place yesterday. Jason, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. For the record, Jason Brown, County Budget Director. As the Board approved, May 9th, the auction of the old Fire Station 9 was held yesterday. I'm sure you've seen it all in the paper. The only update we need to give here is that the final auction price was $160,000 to the county in accordance with surplusing real property, in accordance with Florida statutes, Chapter 125. We just need to have the Board ratify this sale and approve the chairman to sign the closing contract.
Any questions for Mr. Brown? Shall entertain a motion to approve the sale?
Move to approve, Mr.
I'll
Second.
second that with discussion.
We have a motion from Commissioner Davis, a second from Commissioner O'Brien. Commissioner O'Brien.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Daniels on the auction. I did go up there and attend, and he did a very good job of keeping the auction going, and the bids kept going up and up and up, and he and his team kind of kept it alive and really was very impressive. And I think the final price was a lot higher than a lot of people estimated going in. So I want to thank him for a job well done. I do want to bring up, though, prior to the auction of the fire station, there was a second auction that was conducted prior to the fire station. And in that auction, the purchasing manager, Jerry Davis, had a winning bid of being a county commissioner for a day. And so, Mr. Chairman, at some point, it was chairman for a day.
It was 30 days, as a matter of fact.
30 days,
Yes.
yeah. So, congratulations, Mr. Davis, on your winning bid to be a chairman for the month. And
Yeah, that's fine. I just heard from the county administrator, Joe Bear, that A1 Wally is coming back to us. Jerry, we're going to be planning for that day, so just so you're known if you want to review the tapes. Go ahead. Any other questions for Mr. Brown? Chair, I want to take, we have a motion from Commissioner Davis, a second from Commissioner O'Brien. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Next up is Public Works, the Indian River North Sidewalk Project. Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And Commissioners, this is a update on the Indian River Drive North Sidewalk Project. This project had been going along fairly smoothly until just recently, where we hit a snag, and that's what we're going to update you on today. This is the north segment of the Indian River Drive sidewalk. It's the segment that runs between the city of Sebastian north city limits up to Roseland Road. It starts where the existing sidewalk that runs along the east side of Indian River Drive stops at the very north Sebastian city limit near Captain Butcher's, and this project would continue that sidewalk north for a distance of 1.2 miles and connect up with Roseland Road on the north end. Again, the existing sidewalk is a 6-foot sidewalk along the east side of Indian River Drive, and this project would tie into that and continue it north, that same 6-foot wide sidewalk or path all the way up to Roseland Road. A little history on the project. Began back in 2000 when the NPO rated it the #1 enhancement project in the county. Enhancement funds, as you may know, are used for sidewalk type projects, landscaping projects, things of that nature. In 2001, the board approved enhancement funding to be used for the project. We later, in 2006, put together a LAP, or Local Agency Program Agreement, with the DOT. They agreed through LAP funding to fund the entire project, which at the time was estimated to cost $262,000. We held public information meetings in 2003 and also in 2009. In July of 2009, the board authorized staff to move forward with the sidewalk construction project. At the time, we were just finalizing the construction plans. And also, we had originally programmed it to begin construction earlier, about in 2009. DOT didn't have enough funding then to do the whole project. We had to wait another year or so to accumulate some more enhancement funding. We got that funding approved in 2010. They agreed to fund the entire cost of the project, which had risen by then to $500,000. When we submitted the final plans to DOT, they made a request for what's called a Cultural Resource Assessment Survey, or a CRAS report. What that is it's somewhat of a look at the historical or cultural significance of the area where you're going to do your construction. County staff, we got with a consultant and had that CRAS report put together, submitted it to the DOT, and as a result of the review of that report, the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the DOT requested additional testing, cultural historical testing of this sidewalk area. It's called Phase 2 testing. We did the Phase 1 testing, they wanted Phase 2 testing. They also asked for a review of the National Register of Historic Places to look further into 2 midden sites that were discovered, or I guess were known about along the sidewalk area. Midden sites, which are also called Indian mounds or shell mounds, they're basically waste piles that some of the early inhabitants of Florida piled up along river or water areas. Scientists and archaeologists, they often pick through these remains to see what they can find about the daily life of early inhabitants. They can contain bones and shells and other artifacts, things like that. We've gotten a wide variety of cost estimates. We're hearing that this testing and site evaluation and possible mitigation can cost anywhere from $100,000 up to even $1 million, depending on how extensive it could be. And again, remember, this is on a $500,000 sidewalk project. One of our worries is that if these sites should be designated National Historic Places, and we were not allowed to build sidewalk in those areas, since they occur within the middle of that sidewalk project, that would end up forcing us to break the sidewalk up to avoid them. One of the criteria of LAP funding is that the sidewalk be a continuous segment. You can't break it up. And if you do break it up, you have to have logical termini so that you don't just leave a pedestrian hanging out in the middle of a mid-block area. You have to have them in a place where they can cross the road safely to get back to the other side or at a traffic signal or a marked crosswalk. So we know that if these studies go through and they get designated historic places, kind of like the Tripson site on 12th Street, that we'll have to avoid those areas and not be able to put sidewalk in. These are the two midden sites that were found. This is the sidewalk project in blue. The two midden sites are, one is up on the very north end, just south of Roseland Road, and one is about just north of about the halfway point of the sidewalk. So they're pretty extensive sites where the middens are located. DOT also, down at the bottom here near the Archie Smith Fish House, originally they said that go ahead and put the sidewalk in front of the fish house, it's not going to be a problem. Then they backtracked on that and said, well, we think the fish house is a historic building, so we don't want you to do that. Staff doesn't feel that the fish house would be a problem. If you look at the front of the fish house, it's basically got a concrete apron all along the front of it that sort of functions as a sidewalk anyway. And if you follow the path of the sidewalk, it would end up guiding pedestrians right along that concrete area anyway. So we don't feel that would be a problem. If we needed to, we could always paint crosswalk lines or something to designate the path for pedestrians. So the fish house would not be a problem, but the midden sites would be. Staff's recommendation at this point is that the Indian River Drive North Sidewalk project be postponed until one of two things happen. Either we can identify local funding sources for the sidewalk, in which we would just take it and extend it as far north as we could, or until DOT sticks with their original agreement, allows us to use the LAP funding to build the entire project without any further archaeological testing of these sites.
I'm going to beat Commissioner Davis to the punch on this one. I find this to be incredibly sad, and incredibly sad for the building of a good community. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember going back when Sebastian built their portion of their sidewalk, and I may have been with my wife, and we started to walk up it, and we walked up to the end, and it follows the river, and the normal expectation for anybody here would be you'd end up at US 1, and suddenly it stopped. And initially I was going, why the heck did this thing stop here? And then I was thinking for a minute, oh, it's the city-county line. My goodness, isn't this silly? And then it turned out that there were some other problems with the project that should have gone all the way through at that time, but there are other project problems that came up. And now, this is exactly the right type of thing for this community. I mean, you should be able to walk the full distance from where it begins in the south up to US 1. Now this county staff is doing exactly the right thing, for which I applaud you. But now you have one government saying, listen, we're going to help you do it. Well, I guess another arm of the same governmental agency is telling you, but you can't do it. And this is the worst sort of over-government, a type of the worst sort of over-government that comes before us on, unfortunately, too often a regular basis. So, I mean, my own feeling is to try to suggest you go work with FDOT and see if they can be somehow reasonable. Because this is, to my mind, again, incredibly important for building a good, viable community over the long term. I think this is a good reason why all of us on this dais are up at this dais. And, we certainly don't want to be part of those discussions with that bureaucracy because we don't have the patience you do. But anyway, that's the direction I'd probably like to go. Commissioner Davis.
This is something that I think we ought to put together a package and send this straight to the governor's desk and let him look at it and say, this is exactly why we can't afford sidewalks. It's ridiculous. And I'm not chastising y'all, please don't take it that way. It's more the frustration of the bureaucracy that I feel up here, because we've been, I've been working on this thing forever, and Commissioner Solari, I agree with everything that you say, but this is in my opinion, the epitome of a bureaucracy out of control. And I don't know if there's any way around it from the governor's desk, but if not, maybe the only thing that I could offer at this point, other than that, would be get with the local university that may have an archaeological class and see if there's a way they can come up here and dig through our middens to enough to certify that we can go ahead and put a sidewalk down.
Well, what's interesting is when you look at our sidewalk construction, we're not really excavating at all.
No, there's houses there already.
We're actually building up the edge of the roadway and then putting the sidewalk in. So we're not really excavating. There's just a very small area, about 15% of the entire length of the project, where we have to put some curbing in. So we're doing a little bit of digging right there, and that's right along the edge of the road.
And we're doing that at the request of the homeowner, so we don't come too close to their property
that's
lines,
exactly
which you would think would be where most of the middens would be.
We're going to add $1 million in cost.
Is there any way that we can put into this project a clause where they could go into the site if they needed to once the project is completed?
Well, that would be a given. They would always have access to the site. But first of all, we have to get the lab funding. And without the lab funding, the project is basically dead at this point. And we can't get the lab funding until we move forward with the additional phase 2 testing and site evaluation. So we can't get to that point where we would be able to begin construction so that we could give them access.
So we're looking at a possibility of upwards of $1 million examination, investigation, assessment.
Well, when you look at when you tie it all together, the site evaluation, the phase 2 testing, and possible mitigation, it could get very expensive. Some of our testing estimates have come down recently. We're getting more reasonable numbers, but still, if you put it all together and tie it all together, then look at mitigation. Yeah, it could be very expensive.
Mr. Chairman, I'd love the opportunity to sit with Chris and to draft a letter and send this up to whomever is in charge of this type of bureaucratic.
If you'd like to put that in the form of a motion, I'll second it.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Davis to send a letter up there, a well-crafted letter, trying to explain some of the problems of the bureaucracy and the cost it adds.
Start out with help.
Second from Commissioner Solari. Any other discussion?
I'd just also like to point out that, I don't mind us doing the phase 1 evaluation as part of our process, but it seems to me now that you have a private group, the Seminole Tribe, asking us to spend tons of taxpayer dollars to further their interest, and I don't think that's in the best interest of the taxpayer. So if they want this done, fine, they should pay for it. I mean, it's not something the taxpayers should carry that burden, I don't believe. So when you craft this letter, if you could work that in as well, that this is almost an unfunded mandate for a private organization, that they want to use taxpayer dollars to advance something that is their particular purpose and not in the best interest of the general public.
Well, this present motion doesn't address all of what staff is before us for today, so I'll be happy to entertain a second motion, which would include staff pursuing what's reasonable, including asking the Seminoles to pay for the dig.
Well, Commissioner, let's just put something together and let's try to do it in one motion. I won't send it out until we all have a chance to look at it. It'll come before us under my matters or something along those lines.
Okay, so we add that portion, and should we add that?
I'm sure
the Seminoles to pay.
Well, I see more of a tie-up at the state level than I do with the Seminole Tribe of Florida.
Fine, so we have that.
But it may include.
It may, yes.
May include it.
We'll, as I'll research it and look into it and work with them, we'll.
Fine, so we'll leave it in
help.
basically
I have
Commissioner Davis.
full confidence that
Yes,
Commissioner
I do
Davis'
too.
passion in this subject matter will get it a well-written letter.
Excellent, so we have a motion from Commissioner Davis, the second from Commissioner Solari. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I just see this as being a bigger problem in the future, go 200 years from now when they start wanting to excavate our landfills.
Oh, absolutely. I'm worried about my compost heap in the backyard now.
Yeah.
Everything that they talked about, these middens I have in my compost heap, and I'm afraid that, some future landowner might be able, well, anyway.
These are much larger.
You're going to devalue your own property right before your eyes.
It's
Because
terrible.
we're trying to be green.
Luckily, it's right along the easement, so we can't build there anyway because of another number of government.
You're growing mulch in
Trying to save on garbage.
I don't know if we want to discuss that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Next up, Utility Services approval of the Young's Market Utility Easement Purchase Agreement. And it looks like Mr. Olson is going to lead us in this. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Eric Olson, Director of Utilities. This project began back in actually April of 2009 when the board authorized staff to begin negotiating with the Young Market, or the KIMS, to establish an easement for construction. A little bit of history of what took place. The KIMS were in the process of expanding a portion of Young's Market, and unbeknownst to them, there was, as they began to construct the stormwater discharge from that point, they discovered a series of pipes and such like that. As a result, their project came to a halt for a short period of time, and they had to establish where did the pipes come from, who owned them, and this sort of thing. It turned out that the county did in fact own these pipes, and they were part of a lift station that had been in existence for over 50 years there. But unfortunately, what we have is the lift station itself that's been there for an extensive amount of time, upwards of 50 years, and a portion of where the pipes are located, there's never been an easement associated with this. We originally met with the attorney, Michael O'Hare, representing the KIMS early on back in 2009, and proposed a settlement with them. Unfortunately, the KIMS did not agree and basically backed out of the discussion for a long period of time until recently. The KIMS changed attorneys, went to Charles Sullivan Sr., and from that point forward renegotiated a series of other criteria. The long and the short of it is that the KIMS basically wanted to be recompensated for expenses that incurred to them during the construction of their project, that as a result of our pipes being in their way, so to speak. So the easement that we're acquiring, hopefully today, will cost $45,251.90. But with that easement, we're basically reimbursing the contractor, the attorneys, the architect, for the experience or the delays associated with our project that existed prior to that point. What's important to us is that we need to do some additional future construction to modify the force main leaving there going to our new wastewater plant. So it is important that we establish the easement, but unfortunately this is what we've got today.
It was like Charles Sullivan's getting the Vista Royale mowing fee back.
You're right close.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve from Commissioner Davis, a second from Commissioner Flesher. Any other questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Ms. Olson.
Next up is staff explanation of the proposed changes to the Clean Water Act.
Again, for the record, Eric Olson, Director of Utilities. This explanation is really as a result of a series of letters that were sent out to counties probably across the nation. This particular one is sent from a Peg Ryan of the Conservation Leaders Network, and they're requesting letters of support be sent to the Corps of Engineers, the EPA, Congress, whichever, to make some changes in the Clean Water Act. Let's step back in time. In 1972, Congress authorized the Clean Water Act, basically protecting major tributaries, waterways, waters of the United States. At that time, the language was very broad with respect to what's considered the protection of tributaries, wetlands, associated waterways relative to these waters of the state or the United States. In 2006, there was a Supreme Court final hearing that basically restructured an understanding of what exactly is considered to be affecting major waterways of the United States. And as a result, EPA changed the ruling of the Clean Water Act and modified it slightly. And the gist of it is basically that the modification requires that small tributaries, wetlands, waterways that may not be even wet during portions of the year, to be considered part of this Clean Water Act must show a nexus, a significant nexus. What does that mean? It means that if you have a small waterway next to a major tributary, and the tributary is clearly defined by the EPA Clean Water Act, you need to show that that waterway has an effect to the tributary or to the river body. And if that nexus isn't shown, then it's not to be considered as part of that. Fast forward to today, EPA is now considering reinstating the original premise of a very broad perspective of the Clean Water Act rather than this significant nexus. So what is being put on the table today is that the Conservation Leaders Network is supporting this change to go back to the broad interpretation rather than showing a significant nexus. The staff has reviewed this, and we don't pretend to be the ultimate experts regarding the Clean Water Act, but on the basis of our understanding, we cannot support the idea of a blanket submittal of support on this process, simply because of the fact that our belief is that the 2006 changes did not significantly change or preclude the ability to monitor these tributaries and wetlands. The only thing we support is that the effect showing the significant nexus is still there. So again, we do not support the idea of the Commission blindly sending out letters of support regarding stepping backwards in time to 1972 interpretation of the Clean Water Act. And I'll try to attempt to answer any questions you may have, but that's...
Well, Eric, if you're that concerned about it, and to make that kind of a statement, well, I wouldn't mind you putting something forward that states what you say and send that to whomever. I mean,
I'd like to work with Alan on this, but yes, we could do that.
Is there a motion?
That's a motion.
I'll second it. We have a motion from Commissioner Davis for staff recommendation with the addition that they become proactive and write a letter in support of the staff's position. Any other conversation or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Eric, thank you very much. Next up, we have County Attorney's Matters, the demolition of an uncompleted home in Marsh Island. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Bill DeBraw on behalf of the County Attorney's Office. Commissioners, this morning we have a demolition of an uncompleted home on Marsh Island. You can take a look at the overhead. There's an aerial view of the Marsh Island subdivision consisting of about 30 lots with a marina and a clubhouse. The offensive lot there you can see with the property ID tag on it is lot 15. Construction of this this house was started back in 2007. And I'm not going to be able to find the aerial or the other photo of it. Somebody must have erased it, I think. There it is. There's the two-story house. You see it's quite a large structure. Off to the right-hand side over here you can see it's a golf cart garage. Behind it you have a nice pool that's uncompleted. There are no doors and windows at all in the structure. Construction stopped in this building in 2009. There were a couple of lawsuits that bloomed out of it. One of since has been dismissed. The owner, Paul Shoquist, is a resident of Central Florida. He was sent notice of our intent to demolish back in October. We have not heard anything from him concerning this matter. You can see that the roofing is incomplete, and right as far as the roofing is concerned, you can see the circled areas where the roof doesn't come all the way down to meet the walls. Therefore, the rainwater is coming in, going right into the second story, soaking the second story, rotting out all the floor trusses that are there. You can see that the covering on the roof is also now rotting, creating both an eyesore for the neighborhood and also a windstorm, wind event type of problem. The Homeowners Association approached us last month and came up with an offer. In order for the county to go ahead and demolish this, we'd have to put it out for public bid, and treat it just like any other demolition. The possibility of getting our money back after we place a lien on this property would be pretty remote. There's a $3 million mortgage that would sit in front of our demolition lien. There's a variety of liens remaining from the construction of the house or partial construction of the house that would also be sitting in front of our construction lien. So, you know, it wouldn't be a sure thing at all that we would get any reimbursement after all is said and done with the demolition. Recognizing that this is also in their interest, the Homeowners Association has come up with an offer that if the county proceeds with its demolition plans in this matter, they would contribute up to $15,000 by meeting us halfway. They would go in with us on a 50-50 basis and up to $15,000 of their money. Staff estimates that this would be about $20,000 to tear the building down, fill in the pool, and remove all the rubble and debris from there on. As far as recommendations, staff's recommendation is to go ahead and direct the county attorney's office to enter into an agreement with the Marsh Island Homeowners Association for demolition of the structure, partial reimbursement of demolition of the structure. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Commissioner Davis.
Yes, that would include, I'm assuming, tipping fees and at the landfill for the C&D?
Yes, it would be. And there's quite a bit of recycling that will be done in this matter because you can see it's all concrete block.
And what I'd also like to work in that with, because this is a unique situation, and especially with them stepping forward. When you say total costs, not I'm assuming that means staff time and everything. That there's going to be a total cost for the taxpayers on this. That's kind of where I'd like to see this wind up.
I understand. Usually, what we do in our demolitions is we will put together 3 or 4 structures that need to be demolished, put them out to public bid, get one bid on all the structures. It will be an itemized bid, but get a total bid on the structures and go ahead and bring that bid back to the commission for approval. Since we would be incorporating other structures with this one, it might be a little difficult to sort out the staff time associated with it. But
I just use a 10% administrative fee based on the individual bid.
Could be.
That seems probably reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the total bid would be if it's.
Well, we have an estimate of about $20,000. That'd be about $2,000, which.
What about the cost of the actual abatement in the court system? I'm assuming we have to go there first.
No, we would treat this just like any other demolition matter.
Okay.
It's been declared unsafe by our building officials, so we would proceed just like this would be a garage with pepper trees growing up through the roof.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, I wanted to make sure in this process that we weren't stepping outside of our normal demolition process that comes with certain protections for us and doing some type of joint venture with the association to tear down this property. We didn't want to cross that line and end up over there. So we're doing everything exactly as we would if this was solely on our own as a demolition pursuant to the statute and the code. The only unusual feature is we have this association coming forward and offering to basically reimburse us for some of the cost. That really is a private contract matter between the county and that party. So the issues you're raising can be something we can go back to the association and say, look, the Board of County Commissioners is willing to do this, but as we define costs that you're going to pay 1/2 of, here's some additional components we want you to pay for.
And from our standpoint, I think that if we don't get the roof now with the water damage, we'll be pulling it out of the lagoon. It'll be 3 times the price.
Or out of someone's house.
Yeah.
And,
right.
Any other questions of staff?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask Bill, Councilor, is there any shot at this home being saved?
You know, from what the building department is telling me now, it would almost be 6 of one, half dozen of another to go ahead and demolish it and start from the very beginning, because the first thing that you're going to have to do is rip out all the floors and the walls that aren't dry-walled in, that are all rotted because they've been exposed to the elements for the last 2 years, plus in a little bit of a salt situation.
And there's been no public interest to take any such action?
No.
Well, with that, Mr. Chairman, move forward with staff's recommendation. And I believe that the Marsh Island property, the homeowners association should be commended for stepping up to the plate and offsetting the taxpayers' burden.
Motion from Commissioner Flesher. Second from Commissioner Davis. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Bill. Next up, under attorney's matters, we have the county commissioner districts redistricting based on the 2010 decennial census. Mr. Plockwich.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As you all know, the United States Census Bureau has completed the decennial census in 2010. That triggers some responsibilities on this board. Specifically, the Florida Constitution in Article 8, Section 1E states that after each decennial census, the Board of County Commissioners shall divide the county into districts of contiguous territory as nearly equal in population as practicable. That constitutional provision is further implemented by a statutory provision, 125.01, which says that the county commissioners' districts in each county, quote, shall be as nearly equal in proportion to population as possible. And it goes on to say that the changes in the boundaries of the county commissioner districts pursuant to this statute shall be made only in odd-numbered years. So you add all that up, and where you end up is, this year being 2011, this commission is required to take a look at its commissioner districts and redistrict them or reconfigure the boundaries so that we end up with districts that meet these requirements of the statute and the Constitution, which are that they be as nearly as equal in population as possible or as practicable. Now, our existing county commission districts, in terms of population, run from a low number of 20,700 residents to a high of 32,000 residents. So you can see currently we have a fairly large variation between the numbers of residents that you have in your respective districts. So that does put us in the position where we're going to have to reconfigure these districts a little bit. Now, we put this on the agenda today for a couple of purposes. Number one, just to have the first public discussion on the subject, because we have not previously talked about it at all. Number two, to discuss a schedule to approach and complete this task. And again, our requirement under the law is that we complete it before the end of 2011. And number three, to talk a little bit about a redistricting plan that the county attorney's office is working on as a component of this whole process. On page 92 of your commission package is an outline of a schedule by which we are proposing that we approach this task. And I might add that county staff has met with Commissioner Solari and with the supervisor of elections, and this schedule came out of those discussions. But basically the schedule starts with today's general discussion and adoption of a schedule. And then going forward, the schedule is on July 12, 2011, we would have a public hearing and take input, etc. But at the end of that public hearing, we would adopt a plan for the redistricting. And I'll talk in a few minutes about the plan. Once that plan is adopted on July 12, between that date and September 13, county staff working with the supervisor, working with the municipalities, would develop some conceptual maps of the new reconfigured districts and bring those back to this board on September 13 for a second public hearing where the board could take a look at those and start to give final instructions for adoption of a final plan. Between September 13 and October 18, county staff, again working with the supervisor and the municipalities, would develop a final proposed map showing the districts, and that would come before this board for a third and final public hearing on October 18 for adoption of that final map, and that would be a completion of the process. We do intend throughout the process, one of the clearly stated objectives of the group, and particularly Chairman Solari, was that the process be as open to the public as possible, as transparent, that we will post our plan, we will post our maps, we will post all of the development of this process on our website, with it someplace physically within our facilities here. We would post them on the supervisor's website, also within the supervisor's office, and do the same thing with any municipality who wants to do that with us. Now, getting back to the plan for a moment, technically a plan is not required. We could go forward without having a plan, but I think our office believes that it's a good idea to have a plan. And when I'm using that phrase, I'm talking about a fairly simple 2 or 3 page document that, number one, informs the community what we're doing and how we're doing it, and number two, sets forth the criteria that the Board of County Commissioners is giving to staff for staff to use in drawing its new districts. Keep in mind, in the end, the GIS people of our county are going to have to sit down and come up with these districts. They need some guidance from this board as to what factors they should use in doing that. So that's the purpose of a plan. Now, some of the different items that would be touched upon in the plan, and some of the general issues that I just wanted to throw out on the table today, in case anybody has any discussion on them. Some of the issues you get into on these plans are, do you base it on total population within a district, or do you vote it on, do you base it on voting population within a district? When the statute and the Constitution says population is nearly equal as possible, are we talking about total population or voting population. The trend and the push legally clearly is toward total population, and we're headed in that direction unless you strongly feel to the contrary. When you get to the question of as nearly equal as possible or as nearly equal as practicable, the question is, what exactly does that mean when you're dealing with numbers? The standards that have emerged, I don't believe they're written down in any legal requirement, but as a matter of custom, the standards that seem to have emerged are that in the end, your population numbers will be from your lowest to your highest numbers within the districts will be about a 10% deviation. The largest district will have about 10% or less of the amount of residents as your smallest district would. And there's a second standard on the numbers, which if you were to figure the ideal population, in other words, if you had 100,000 residents in the county and you have 5 districts, a perfect system would have 20,000 people in each district. So if we can do that with our county and find that exact number and try to deviate no more than 5% up or down, that's something we're headed to again, to try to get us to that as nearly equal as possible. Compactness, trying to keep the district relatively compact rather than sprawling out throughout the county. Contiguity, in other words, that the district certainly be all one piece. You don't have to leave the district and then re-enter it because they're made up of separate pieces. Trying to deal with municipalities in all of this. You know, is it possible that we can keep a municipality within a district? Is that a good thing? Well, we're going to try to at least look at that to preserve municipal lines. Also following major and man-made boundaries like bridges, rivers, the intercoastal perhaps, neighborhoods, subdivisions. Those are things that you sometimes try to do. We will try to preserve the cores of these districts. So in other words, we're trying to not take a district that is, located in one area and totally move it to some different place. We want to preserve that core as much as possible and make the changes around the edges. Communities of interest sometimes come into play. If you're aware that there is an area of your county that shares a community interest, do what you can to keep that together rather than split it and perhaps dilute its ability to have a say in our system. Those are the types of factors that we're going to work with. Also, on the other side of the coin, as we try to configure these systems, we need to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation of violating any law that relates to this. And the primary law that everybody looks at is the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, which basically says we can't gerrymander or manipulate these systems in such a way as to deny somebody, particularly a protected class of individuals, their rightful, proper access to the political system. And certainly we're not going to do that, and I don't think we'll have any problems in that direction. But that's basically what we're going to do. We are preparing the plan in our office, in the county attorney's office. We will complete it for your consideration later this week, but we will prepare it, we will circulate it to you, and it will be then discussed on the July 12 meeting and perhaps revised, but in any event, our hope is you will adopt the plan at that time. Staff will then take that plan and move forward through the process of redefining the districts to bring them in compliance with law. So that's our overall plan. I should add one last thing. The school district has its own districts, and the school district also has 5 districts. And as I understand, right now they are similar but not identical. And I also understand that the numbers of the districts are different. I don't know specifically what the differences are, but by way of example, District 1 for the commissioners might be District 5 for the school board. Okay.
That's correct.
Randomly, the odds of that were not good, but
That's just government.
So in any event,
What's least logical, and that's what it was.
Well, I don't know if 2 is the same as 4. I won't go that far, but I was pleased with 1 and 5.
If we excavate our landfill, we'll find the answer.
Yeah. We do have a line of communication open with the school board, and the intent is that they're going to follow us through this process, and assuming they have no objection to the parameters that we come up with for the districts, the intent is we will end this process with the school districts being identical to the commissioner districts, and they will all have the same numbers. So it'll be a more uniform and simple system for all of us to understand. So that's where we're headed. I just wanted to lay this out there, open the floor for any kind of discussion you might have. But again, also let the public know that this process is now before us, and this is how we're planning on handling it.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Davis.
I think probably the most significant thing that we can do is keep as many people in the loop as possible as this moves forward, to the point that every municipality, their attorney, their administrators or managers, city council members of each municipality. It's going to be, it's pretty simple to do with technology, with the email list, the local papers, everything that we can do to, and any correspondence that really comes about this should be more than available, to the point that they're sick and tired of seeing it because they get so much of it.
And we have sent, Commissioner Solari sent a letter to all of the municipalities, the mayors and the city or town managers, as well as the school board and their chair, advising them of the schedule that I just outlined, and number two, the fact that today's meeting would be held for this initial discussion. So our intent is to get everybody out there on a distribution list, and no one will claim at the end of the process that they didn't have fair opportunity to be heard.
Okay.
We're also going to ask them to put the maps in the city when we have them. We're going to send letters and ask them to have them available to the public in each city if they can. We can't tell them to do that, but we're going to do that.
Well, and one other thing along those lines, brought up the idea of maybe having a couple workshops along the way, maybe one in the North County, one in the South County, and that was an item for us to discuss and see if you wanted to. My thinking was that workshops are generally a little less formal, and some people might come to a workshop or might not want to come before a county commission and speak publicly. The dais might be willing to come to a workshop. So I'm just tossing that out there for the board's consideration. Sure. Commissioner Wheeler.
Yeah, I appreciate the thoroughness in which Mr. Flakowicz has put into this. And also, but I think, at least from my perspective, when people talk about redistricting, they think of the state representatives or congressional districts where there's a lot of gerrymandering going on to carve out political districts for Democrats or Republicans or whatever. And at least from my point of view, the redistricting in this county is almost insignificant. We aren't single-member districts. There's no gerrymandering. We all serve at the pleasure of the entire county. We don't run in a district. And basically, from my perspective, again, about the only significance of having a district is whoever decides to run for this office has to live in that district. They're voted on by the entire county. They aren't voted on just by their district. So I think that, if people understand there's a tremendous difference between the state and the federal government redistricting, and the approach they take, depending on who's holding the governor's office, is considerably different than this county. And I think that, I think that maybe we're making a lot bigger deal out of this than it really is.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Davis.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, but I find myself in an awkward situation, and I'll tell you what that is. I think I've got the largest population in District 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you do. Yes.
I think the second
30,000
is Commissioner Flesher, if I'm not mistaken.
The length.
As far as the population?
Yes.
And when you look at it from this standpoint where I sit right now, and, suppose that obviously they can't draw either one of us out of our districts. It very well could mean that a boundary, my boundary is going to shrink. Commissioner Flesher's boundary needs to shrink. But the only way for really that to happen is for to the south, for those to move forward to the north somehow. And what that very may entail, that I want to be hypersensitive about, is it very well could make it so that somebody that is interested in running for District 1 will be out of that area and be in District 2 and have to wait another 2 years. And so I just want it all to be out, open on the table and above reproach.
I would agree with that, but I don't think that is should even be a consideration of who wants to run and where they live. I think we should redistrict. primarily based on population, making it equal and drawing the lines. If they're in the district, they're in. If they're not, they're not.
I agree with you, but I don't want anything, I just want it to be all on the table in front of.
So I appreciate the openness, and I also, I think Mr. Polakowicz has gone the extra mile in laying this out very, very thoroughly and very specifically. I just didn't want to send the message or leave the message in people's minds that redistricting, in my opinion at least, is near as important in our county and the way we do business compared to all the news media about state redistricting and congressional districts, which basically every 10 years circle around whether you want a Democrat or Republican district. I mean, they gerrymander them all over the place.
I'd rather reword that. I'd rather say that it is just as important to us, but because we've done such a better job over the years, it's not as much of an issue.
In handling our constituency.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I agree and disagree as far as the importance, whereas the constituency looks at their map, or then they call the county commission, and when they find that they live in a certain district, that's who they want to deal with, and that's how they want to deal with it, and they'll discuss the importance of them living in a district. While we are not district sensitive at this point, there may come a point in the future in this county's history that there will be a time where we are district sensitive. I'm not projecting that. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying there might be a possibility. And at this point, looking at the map, there is an imbalance. I believe Commissioner O'Brien lives in the most densely populated district, and well, his is tighter, and this might tie in with the travel expenses as well. I had the luxury and privilege and honor of working in the longest district, and Commissioner Davis works in the widest area. Whereas constituents would like you to stop by and look at a situation, I believe that it should be fair and across the board and consistent with a proper balance. Also, looking at the map, I did see that there was quite a bit of gerrymandering, and some of it is explainable. For example, some of my constituents are in the county correctional facility, and that might bring up another point where council has discussed, if we're looking at voting population as opposed to total population, the total population that does not have the right to vote, they may have made a choice in their life which would prohibit them from having that choice. Nonetheless, they are still constituents, they have needs, they have concerns, and they need to be addressed. So with that in mind, I believe that there's a lot of the one-sided approach on gerrymandering that needs to be looked at. It's rather jagged. I know Commissioner Davis's lines are basically, it's a big box. And mine is lengthy, and it just gets chopped up, and I think Commissioner Wheeler's as well. There's looking at the map. I don't know. Well, Will has the map, doesn't he?
We'll have some additional maps.
Okay. There's a lot of chunking out, and again, it's about perception. It's about understanding. It's about the constituent looking at it. Well, I'm in a certain district, and this is the way I want to deal with it. I think that's the reason why we would like to see conformity with the school districts as well as our districts, so that it could be one-stop shopping for the constituents concerned.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Wheeler, then Commissioner Davis.
I'd just like, based on what Mr. Fletcher said, I would think that the best way to prevent any political overtones here is the way we're going.
Right.
And staff is looking at this. They don't have any political interests, and they come back, and the primary thing in the Constitution is to have as equal possible numbers as possible. And the districts do change over tenure. We've had phenomenal growth in the last 10 years, which changed some of the districts. Yeah. Sebastian being one of the primary ones, and South County also. So I think the best thing to do is to have people look at this objectively, thoroughly, and come up and draw the lines and keep the politicians out of it. And then there's never a question about it being political.
And Mr. Chairman, I know that we have some maps available that lay out the current districts. I've also seen the numbers, and I don't know how public we can make those right now, but this very well, I think, should be on our website, so that somebody can click on it. They can see what I think I know as far as having 32,000 people in District 1 for also, all of us. And that way, everything, Dory, that we know is on the website for people to start looking at now.
One's the gamut. I think there's...
I'm sorry?
Scott Johnson, our webmaster, has that prepared to turn on today.
Okay, super. So that'll be available tomorrow.
Commissioner Fletcher?
The current difference between districts is about 10,000. There's only a few that are rather close, and there's one that's 30,000, and one that's the smallest district has about just over 20,000.
Oh, I see. The
constituents, and I believe that's what we're trying to do to narrow it down.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just to follow up your thought, Mr. Chairman, is we've talked in the past about maybe holding a meeting up in Sebastian to have more contact with North County. So for discussion, I'd put out there that maybe we consider scheduling our September 20th meeting up in Sebastian, where we could put a public hearing on this matter up there and maybe reduce the agenda to limit how much staff might have to come up. But we're scheduled to meet on the 20th anyway. If we could hold that meeting up in Sebastian, this could be a public hearing on this to get more input in the North County, and just try to keep that agenda as small as possible to limit how much staff might have to go.
Is that a motion?
I'd be glad to make it a motion.
I'll second it.
Just real quick, Mr. Baird, I'm assuming by September 20th we'll have most of, all except for probably the final hearing on the budget at that time. So there's not going to be a whole lot of preoccupation the staff's going to have to be considering at that time. It'll very much.
Yeah, actually, this is a whole different set of staff. This is going to be GIS. We'll be working on it, so it's a whole different set of staff, so it shouldn't be overburdening.
Okay.
Our budget hearings are going to be right now. They're scheduled for the 7th and the 14th.
And if we could, Commissioner Brown will make that motion subject to approval from the City Council of Sebastian.
Oh, absolutely. We'd have to ask if they're available and willing. But in my discussions with Mayor Hill, he'd be very excited to have us hold a meeting up there.
Agreed. I had a letter from probably about a month or two ago with the same thing, and have discussed it with him. So any other discussion? This is a motion on the meeting in Sebastian on September 20th.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to check with Will. There'd be no audio-visual concerns. Their system is compatible, and you'd be able to make the presentation?
We'll find out ahead of time what they need, what they have up there, and we'll be ready.
Okay. Yeah, they have a pretty diverse system. It's fairly new.
We've had the two economic summits up there, and we've been able to work it out with Comcast to make it televised in both regions. I don't think the technology will be an issue. And Mr. Chairman, I'll just amend my motion slightly to go ahead and approve the schedule as presented by the county attorney, with public hearings on July 12th, September 13th, October 18th, with the addition of a public hearing September 20th in the city of Sebastian pending city council approval.
Second is amended. Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make one last comment. Commissioner Wheeler's comment about the difference between what we're doing and what's happening at the state level, I think is a very important point, particularly since part of what we're trying to do today is begin the public education process. What they're doing at the state level is a whole different animal. They are creating districts, and those districts will elect people and send them to the state or federal, House of Representatives, etc. Our districts are different. Our districts are essentially residency districts, and that's the same as the case with the school board as well. So we do have lots of reasons to have, good, contiguous, compact, equal in population districts. But we don't have the same motives. We don't have the same tasks that they're doing at the state level. And I think it's important that people understand the difference in those functions.
And I don't know, I'll thrust this out to the other commissioners. It might not be bad to, at a couple of these meetings, have a 5-minute portion about what they're doing at the state.
Oh, that's a good
At
idea.
least
That's
there,
good idea.
because-
That's excellent.
Yeah. We should do that first, and then we can look good.
Make us look
Better
really
by-
backwards, yeah.
That's fine, so at the beginning, but I mean, because there's a lot of confusion about what representatives represents who where.
Yeah.
And same thing with the senators, so.
That's a
if
good
we-
idea. I don't know where that came from, but
If
that's a very
someone,
good idea.
you forget all the good things I do, almost as soon as I suggest it. So Commissioner Davis, if you'd like to make a motion to that effect,
You know what? I think what we should do is, at the beginning of these meetings, is incorporate what they're doing at the state and federal level. And
Great
so-
idea, Wes.
Great idea. Therefore, I move that motion. Wow.
I'll be proud to second that motion. It's such a great idea.
It's so wonderful to be sitting between genius.
What was the motion?
I thought Commissioner Solano would want to second that.
I know.
There was somewhere in
We have a
there.
motion and a second on the table. The motion is by Commissioner Davis, the second from Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank
Can I
you.
have a point of clarification? In the September 20th meeting, you have a Board of County Commissioners meeting that day, and what you're saying is you want to have the Board of County Commissioners meeting in Sebastian?
Yes.
That was my motion, and just, if you can, adjust the agenda so there's as little as possible, so fewer staff would have to, come up, like maybe if any utilities issues could be done before that, so Eric or Himanshu and staff, just try to reduce the agenda
Yes,
as much
we
as
will.
possible.
So we can discuss
So
the issue of the
We can
redistricting.
discuss this issue without having a lot of staff have to come up there and waste time. But
County Commission goes road.
That said, we'll take a break till 11 o'clock.
I'm surprised you didn't say
Morning. It's time to reconvene the June 21st meeting of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County. We now have commissioners' items. There is only one item, and it's Commissioner Peter O'Brien, the National Association of Counties, County Leadership Institute. Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back in May, the board approved my application and subsequent travel to Washington, D.C. to attend a Leadership Institute sponsored by the National Association of Counties. I'd just like to give the board a brief summary of that week. First, I'd like to say it was one of the most rewarding and enriching experiences I've undertaken, and I'd recommend any commissioner here, if you have the opportunity, to take advantage of it. I was one of 19 elected officials from across the country, and there's 2 executive directors from state organizations, the director of the California and director of the Indiana Association of Counties. So there's 21 of us all together. It was very interesting meeting some of the commissioners from other counties across the country. One was from Iowa, and half of her county had just been a mandatory evacuation because of flooding of the Missouri River. Another commissioner from Colorado lived 3 miles outside of any type of service, electric, water, sewer. They were totally off the grid. They had to drive 40 miles to a water co-op to get their potable water, and they used solar for all their electric. And other than a couple times during the winter when the panels were covered by snow and they had to kick the generator on, they utilized solar for all their electric use. So it's very interesting to talk to some of these folks around the country of the issues they face. A couple of things they emphasized when they talk about leadership, and one thing we talked about was the lack of leadership. If you look in the letters to the editor and things like that, the one constant theme is a lack of leadership from elected officials. And so we talked about really what leadership means and what you have to do. And the first tenet is that the current system is perfectly aligned to continue the status quo. In other words, things are set up to keep doing the same thing to get the same results over and over. And so leadership becomes the ability to mobilize people for a change to the status quo. And that can be difficult because when there's a change to the status quo, that usually means somebody is going to lose something. They're going to lose either authority or statue or power, money, but change generally results in a loss to some component out there. And so the trick is, how do you mobilize the people to get them for a change and overcome their either perceived or actual losses? And you do that through what they call an adaptive point of view. And the difference between technical and adaptive is there's 4 criteria. Is the problem clear? Is the solution defined? Is there work needed? And who's going to do the work? An example of a technical analysis is you fall and break your arm. So is the problem clear? Yes. You look at your arm and you see it's bent at an angle that's not normal. Is the solution defined? Yes. You call 911. Is work needed? Yes. The doctor, the expert, is going to have to set your arm and put it in a cast. And who does the work? Is that clear? Yes. The expert, the doctor, is going to do that work. So that would be an example of a technical analysis of an issue. Adaptive is a lot difficult. The actual problem is not as clear. And just to give kind of a real-world example would be the merger of the city and county water systems. To us, we may sit here and think, yes, the problem is very clear. We think the county system is better. But what you realize is there's other opinions, there's other issues involved. And so the problem may not be as clear as we think and requires additional investigation, additional learning. Is the solution clearly defined? Well, again, from maybe our point of view, we think it's very clear, but in reality, the solution is very complex. Is work needed? A lot of work is needed, but not so much an expert as going out to the people, the stakeholders, and finding out what their loss is if there's a change to the status quo. And we hear a lot with the water system that again, the system's perfectly aligned to keep the status quo. And so we keep our system, you keep your system, and that's the status quo. And in able to change that status quo, we need to go to the stakeholders, listen to them, find out what their loss is, either real or perceived, and find a way to mobilize them for a change to that status quo. And who does the work? Again, obviously, that's less clear. It involves a lot of different stakeholders moving forward. And The last point they focus on this is 3 key capacities to leadership. The first is observation, and that's looking at the issue and kind of what would the video recorder show you if you were watching this issue and the actual facts. The second key point is interpretation, and everybody's interpretation of the same video will be different. So you have to look at not only your interpretation, but speak to the others and find out what their interpretation of the observation was. And then you have the third step is intervention, taking action. And then the problem with most leadership in the country and a lot of elected officials is we like to go from step 1, the observation, and jump right to step 3, the intervention, because we all like to think we're technical problem solvers. That an issue comes up, we can point at it and say, okay, staff, you do this, we fixed the problem, now we're done, boy, we did a great job here. And really what we really need to do is spend more time on step 2, the interpretation, finding all the different stories out there, how those stories conflict with the other stories, and then how you bring all those different interpretations together, again, going back to mobilizing people to change the status quo. And then the rest of the time was spent breaking you down in groups of 2, 3, or 5, and kind of bearing your soul to these other elected officials and say, here's a challenge I face, or here's a shortfall that I see in how I do things. And the other officials here would kind of break you down, tear you apart, and then put you back together then with a better idea of where you want to go and what you want to do. So I found it extremely rewarding. If any of the other commissioners or members of the community would like to sit down and go into more detail, I'd be glad to do that. But it was very, very enlightening, very worthwhile, and I look forward to trying to bring a little bit higher level leadership to the citizens of Indian River County. So with that, that's just my update to the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next up, we have special districts and boards, solid waste disposal district, approval of the minutes of May 17th.
Approval.
Motion to approve from Commissioner Wheeler, second from Commissioner Flesher. Any other discussion?
Is that for both minutes?
That's just the one now, and we'll make another one in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. Approval of the minutes of the May 24th meeting.
Approval.
A motion from Commissioner Wheeler, second from Commissioner Davis. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. Next, also under solid waste disposal district, is the solid waste disposal district feedstock supply agreement with ENEOS New Planet Bioenergy LLC. And before we begin the presentation, I'm going to try something which I don't really think is going to go too far, but we just got this contract a few days ago, and for myself, I haven't really had a time to absorb it. I spent about 10 hours on it between Sunday afternoon and yesterday, so I'd be happy to entertain a motion from anybody to table definitely until July 5th, 2011, which is the next BCC meeting, this item.
Mr. Chairman, just my discussion with staff and some of the ENEOS folks, and I understand your concern. However, there are some deadlines that ENEOS faces coming up at the end of the month here, and getting the feedstock supply agreement approved and ratified at this point is critical to some of those time constraints. I would point out that staff has been working on this extensively for, I don't know how many months, Joe, but I know that Humanshu and Eric and Jason and Joe and a lot of folks have been working on this very hard. There's been a lot of extended meetings with ENEOS, and Mr. Plakowicz and counsel for ENEOS have been involved. So I understand your concern, Mr. Chairman, but I think some of the deadlines would prohibit us from tabling this any further. So
well, they might argue against it, but they wouldn't prohibit us. But I just want to note for the record that I've been asking about this contract at least once a month for the last 6 months. And almost every time I discussed it with the county administrator, I let him know that I thought that this would probably be a complex contract and that I would like at least 10 days to go over it. So I just want that out on the record. I'm extremely disappointed that we would get something like this, which my understanding is it wasn't completed until late Thursday afternoon, which again, in my mind, doesn't really give the public enough notice to, if they wanted to actually come and speak or be interested in this, enough notice to really be able to get notification of it. But for myself, again, it put me in the position that for a contract that's important as this, I mean, I went and spent yesterday about 7 hours with the different members of staff. I had 10 pages of questions, and I got through the 10 pages of questions, but had no time to really absorb it, to try to put together what those answers meant from a more global sense. So that said, I'll entertain a motion. If there is none, I'll move on. Hamashu.
I'd like to hear from
Chairman Roy, I want to first of all apologize for not getting it to you sooner, because you had requested us to do that. It's just, unfortunately, it was a complex contract that had a deadline, and we had outside counsel, Alan, and an outside counsel that's expert on these kind of agreements, and it's very detailed, and unfortunately, that we had a deadline to make, and that's what caused it. But you are correct. In a perfect world, we would have liked to have had that to you, and I can only apologize, but we feel we had to. They have this deadline they had to make. They had to have it by the end of June. So I apologize, but I will say that we had Alan looked at it thoroughly, staffs worked at it, and we had an outside counsel which was an expert in this area.
Well, I'm going to be picky on language. Even in an imperfect world, there is plenty of time for something that began a year and a half ago to have a contract with enough time to have the commissioners be able to review it properly. So that said, I don't mean to belabor the point, so I'll ask Himanshu if he wants to begin his presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Himanshu Mehta, Solid Waste Disposal District. And in terms of staff and department, what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background on this project, highlight the key areas of the feedstock supply agreement, a little bit about the financial analysis, and INEOS David King is here as well to do a presentation and a kind of an update on the project status as well. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the financial aspect of their deadlines, and then we'd be happy to kind of open up and answer any and all questions that you have. This is a project that staff has been working on for the past 3 years. And it all started back in 2008. The Solid Waste Disposal District issued an RFP, and for qualified companies, and it was two parts, a waste to energy project or a gas to energy project. And our overall fundamental goal of the RFP is that we would select a firm that would offer the greatest economic and environmental benefit to the district, minimizing any liabilities to the district and the county. And we received 3 proposals at the time. 2 were gas to energy proposals, Waste Management and Amoresco, and New Planet Energy provided the presentation or the proposal on a waste to energy concept. After negotiations and interviews and whatnot, originally with the proposals, New Planet Energy was recommended to the board, primarily because they were utilizing suitable waste materials, landfill gas, and using a patented INEOS biotechnology to manufacture power and ethanol. Again, it was New Planet Energy offering a patented technology by INEOS. We went through board items at the time, and the board approved going forward with a contract with New Planet Energy as long as there was a joint venture between New Planet Energy and the patent holder, INEOS. We proceeded with that, and overall, the SWID board in March of 2009 approved negotiations with the new joint venture, which was INEOS New Planet Bioenergy LLC, and in the spirit of the RFP, what we wanted to focus on is, compared to the original RFP by response by New Planet Energy versus the direction by the board, and to minimize the risk to the district, we focused on a negotiation of a Phase 1 contract, which was going to focus on vegetative waste and landfill gas. Staff has worked diligently with INPB, and we've taken a cautiously optimistic approach throughout this project. And at this time, I'd like to just go over the key highlights of the supply agreement. Again, the 2 key elements that we're talking about in this supply agreement is our vegetative feedstock and our landfill gas. Looking at our current populations and our history of how much vegetative waste we generate in the county, we're looking at providing about 55,000 tons of vegetative material a year. And we're also reserving about 25,000 tons of mulch back to the district. The INPB project, this demonstration project, is looking at bringing in about 150,000 tons of vegetative material. So we're about 1/3 of their total needs. They're planning to secure that from other sources and potentially out-of-county sources as well. One of the things that we've done in this agreement is, in order to protect the district and protect the county, we've added provisions in there that the district and the county will receive the overall lowest rate as compared to other contracts with municipal and county governments. In terms of the technology, this is a INEOS bio process. It's a third-generation advanced biofuel and renewable power technology, processing organic waste through a gasification, fermentation, purification, and a power generation system. The technologies have been developed over 25 years. It's been tested in a pilot plant for the past 8 years. The technology was developed in the USA. Professor Gaddy out of Arkansas, he developed the technology. The patent was sold to INEOS. This is the third largest chemical company based out of England. And this would represent the first commercial demonstration of this technology in the nation. In terms of what is it going to produce with the vegetative material, 8 million gallons of ethanol a year, 6 megawatts of electricity, and in terms of a byproduct back, if you will, out of the whole process, will be about 10,000 tons of dry ash material that would come out of their process. What is the term of this contract that we're looking at? We're looking at a 20-year contract for this agreement with the option of 2 consecutive 10-year renewals. In terms of the financial, what is the mechanism? What are we doing now, and what is the cost structure here? I've outlined here that fees from the district to INPB. And it's similar setup to what we're doing now. We pay a contractor to process our vegetative waste that comes in, and then we pay them an additional fee to currently take material out of county to a waste energy facility. So similarly, the rates that we've set up here, which are lower than our current contract, it's about $9.25 per ton. That is for the initial processing of just mulching of the material, and then $5.15 per ton for supplemental processing, basically putting it through the gasifier to create the ethanol, to create the electricity. Now, what are the fees back? What are the revenue streams back to the district? Currently, the district collect revenues from our land clearing and our chipped material that comes in. This agreement protects those revenues to the district. INPB would collect that from those residents, bring that type of material in. The board here continues to control that rate structure to the community. So INPB would collect those revenues on behalf of the district, return those revenues back to us as a credit. The ash material that we're looking at, again, it's going to go through a process of approval by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. We've negotiated a $5.15 per ton of ash that would come to us for use as daily cover. If it's approved by DEP to use as daily cover, that's the rate that we would get in terms of revenue. Any material that's not used, the ash that's not used, we've negotiated a price of $18.46 per ton. There's backup of how we derive that number. And also, from time to time, just like we do in our facility, there may be some unsuitable materials that they receive at their facility and that they may need to dispose in the landfill. Again, we've applied the same $18.46 per ton to accept that material, and we've capped that amount to about 10,000 tons a year. The other primary revenue stream in this agreement is the landfill gas. And going back to the original RFP and the price that even the other 2 gas providers offered is about 70 cents per million BTUs of landfill gas. And that, as we'll explain later, is our primary revenue stream to the district. Landfill gas right now is collected. It's basically flared. It is a benefit to flare the gas instead of just providing methane to the atmosphere. We're flaring it, turning into carbon dioxide. But this project, turning it into electricity, reduces the greenhouse gas emission potential and turns it into a more beneficial use. It's something that we're not doing right now, and this adds an additional revenue stream to us. How do these rates adjust over 20 years? Now, typically with our contracts for our current processing, every so many years we would go out, put it out to bid, and we would adjust the rates and try to minimize our cost and minimize the cost to the public. What we've done in here is that these rates would increase. There's a CPI provisions for some of the increases on the processing fees. There's a landfill gas adjustment based on our consultant, Geosyntec, also the outside counsel that does a lot of the landfill gas agreements. We looked at an index called a Henry Hub Index, also that would be factored in onto the increase or decrease of those two parameters. In order to protect these rates, again, it's a 20-year agreement. We've added a market adjustment factor at year 7 and year 14 so that we can protect these rates from escalating into a 20-year time frame. And there's detailed provisions that staff worked really hard with INPB to put that in the agreement so that we can always protect the residents in terms of the overall rates that we're seeing. The other element of this is, obviously we're in hurricane season, so we added provisions in here for storm debris. INPB, obviously, their bread and butter is vegetative waste, and they would certainly like that should we have a storm event. And what we indicated in this agreement that we have a process that we go through with the state to designate locations in the county for storm debris collection and processing. So what we've indicated is that we would identify the INPB Bioenergy Center as one of those locations every year, and as much as they can handle and whatever they can process, it is something that we would provide to the facility. Supplemental agreements. Again, this is the feedstock supply agreement. There will be a separate, what we call a landfill gas interconnect agreement. Basically, there are some easements and whatnot that need to be defined between their property and our property. So there was some initial discussions during these negotiations, but we felt that that needs to be ironed out in more detail, and so that will be a separate document that will come back to you at a future time. Also, in terms of a lot of the detailed operational parameters, public ingress, egress, and things like that, and their processing. There's another plan called a feedstock delivery plan that's also going to be developed, and that will be presented at a future time. In terms of any other agreements, there is an easement between the county and Florida Power and Light that will also come to the board at a future time. What about the future? Again, we've been focusing on phase 1. So in this agreement, we have added a future activity, if you will, a provision that both parties agree to negotiate in the future for additions of additional acceptable waste. This is a demonstration of a first commercial demonstration of the technology. We're starting with vegetative waste. That was a minimal risk for the district as well, so that we didn't have to make a lot of changes, if you will, at the landfill. And so this is good for us, it's good for them to demonstrate the technology, but there's a future potential of some of the materials, good materials, organic materials out of C&D waste, and obviously in the future municipal solid waste that could be processed at this facility. So we've created provisions in there that would be a separate negotiation, an amendment to this agreement that would come down in the future years. Overall, we've negotiated in good faith, and we feel that to the benefits to SWID and to the county in terms of establishing a third-generation ethanol facility in New County is exciting. They've obtained all of their various federal, state, and local permits. They've secured project financing through the U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Florida Governor's Energy Office, various investors, and they're looking at a successful startup and operation in 2012. There is detailed financial analysis in your backup. At this time, what I'll do is just highlight two areas.
Detailed financial analysis.
In the agenda item, there's...
What pages? Because I read through it and I didn't find the detailed financial analysis.
I guess what I'm referring to is page 3, 4, and 5 of the agenda item and the exhibits, the attachments 2 and 3 of the agenda packet in the end.
I'd call those bare bones financial analysis, just as opposed to detail, but.
Okay. What I wanted to just do quickly at this time, and we can go into detailed questions, is what staff did in terms of looking at the financial impact to the district is comparing us, the INPB proposal that we have now that we've negotiated to our current operations with CRR. In looking at that agreement, our current cost, if you will, about $872,000. The cost would be reduced with the benefit of the gas revenues down to about $587,000. So we're looking at an overall kind of a variance or favorable variance of $284,000. I mentioned that typically we would go out to bid for these type of vegetative contracts. So recently we've determined that St. Lucie County recently went out for a vegetative contract. Same company, CRR, they've negotiated lower rates than we're seeing right now. So if we compared, if we just wanted to not do this project and just wanted to go to CRR for another 5 years, what would that impact be to us? And again, looking at that, our cost would go down from $872 down to about $668 for our operations. Comparing that to the INPV proposal, again, same price, about $587,000. We're looking at still a favorable benefit of about $80,000. So in terms of a financial, it is a financial gain to the district compared to current operations, and even looking at other potential options. We've got provisions in here to protect and do a market analysis at years 17 and 14 that we feel will help us keep these rates down. But it is certainly a policy determination by the board in terms of looking at a 20-year agreement that we're looking at in front of you today. Again, overall, this is a project that provides environmental and economic benefit to the county, providing a bioethanol plant, first one in the nation. They're looking at providing local jobs, about 150, I think, during construction, 50 permanent jobs, revenues from taxes, as well as I think there will be a lot of other opportunities to bring energy sector companies to our community. In terms of the legal agreement in front of you, I do want to at this time point out that we finalized it on Thursday. We got 3 minor comments back from INPB. Compared to the agreement that you're seeing now, the county attorney has looked at those and recommends approval of those minor edits. And so at this time, staff does recommend that the SWID board approve in substantial form the attached feedstock agreement with INEOS New Planet Bioenergy. And we authorize the chairman to sign the executed agreement on the final direction from the county attorney. At this time, we'd be happy to answer any questions, but if you like, David King is here to give you an update on their project and go over his presentation, and we'll do what you would like, sir.
Any questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Fletcher.
Yes, first and foremost, I just want to thank staff for being available for any questions. I realized that this was fast-moving, and there were negotiations and meetings as recently as Monday. But I want to thank the attorney's office as well, too, for the availability. I did have a question, just I wanted to bring up on the storm debris. I understand that will be one of the designated sites. There's no way of making that site a priority. However, in the past, we've had to process at great expense the vegetative waste up at the fairgrounds specifically to lease out a rather costly and large piece of machinery. Would that be the case with the site at INEOS?
They'll have their equipment. Yeah, they'll have their equipment and whatnot on their site for their daily operations. So a lot of the storm debris in the south part of the county would be kind of directed to there. Like right now, we have a segment of the landfill property designated as a storm debris storage area this year for this hurricane season. So instead of that facility, we would designate the INPB, if you will, in the South County area. but like fairgrounds, I think is probably a designated area even this year for this hurricane season. We have to have multiple areas depending on, you know, what kind of impact we're going to have. I think we're still going to continue to do that. We recently went out to bid for some storm debris contracts, and I think there's provisions in there that maybe if we need to, there would be some processing at the fairgrounds, but we have the option of directing where that material ultimately goes. What we wanted to do is give them the opportunity to have as much material as we can send to them, but wanted to protect the public interest and in terms of our reaction and our ability to clean up after a storm. So again, we definitely want to direct this material to them instead of shipping it out of county. However, we want to clean up the streets, clean up, you know, our county as fast as possible. And so we've allowed that to happen in this agreement, but also protected the county that we will do what's in the public interest after a storm event.
Well, I bring that up because of the storm debris processing. Would that be under the prescribed fees here denoted on this graph, or would there be a separate storm debris contract?
I think I can address that. The contract proposes and contemplates that INEOS would meet the best price that we have available to us after a storm. So we did that to protect ourselves partially because FEMA is going to require us, if we'll be looking for FEMA reimbursement for those activities. We can typically get 75% from FEMA and usually 12.5% from the state is the standard. However, you have to show that you've gone through a competitive process and you're using the best prices available. So the contract does protect us, that it allows us to have for INEOS to match the commercial terms that we would be paying to those other haulers.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got some questions, if I may, Himashu. You said that, I'm not sure I heard you right. Did you say that INEOS has all the permits and licenses they need to go through with
the two primary that I'm aware of is a yard waste processing permit. They have that from the DEP. They also have the other primary permit is the air permit. So I'm aware of those two. David King is here. I know through a lot of the discussions we've had over time, they've secured they're working through our planning department to go through the site plan approval process. But standard water and wastewater permits, St. John's water management permits and things like that. They've diligently been working to get, you know, the site plan approvals done. And so the two primary permits that we were concerned with is the vegetative permit in terms of the district of our ability and their ability to accept vegetative waste, and also in terms of the environmental aspect of it was there an air permit issued by the state, and that has been issued.
So what about the ash recover? Is no permit needed for that?
What we have in provisions is that before we accept any ash, that they will have to obtain approval from the DEP that ash material meets the criteria for acceptance by our landfill as a alternative daily cover, or if it doesn't meet that criteria, to be able to dispose of it in our landfill, that it doesn't have any hazardous constituents and whatnot, that would prohibit it from being disposed in our landfill. Now, so we have that provision that if they don't meet that requirement, that condition, then we will not accept their ash at our facility. So that is a future element that's in the agreement.
Okay, and on the ash, do we have the option to use it for cover? I mean, is the ability to use it for cover always at our discretion?
Yes.
You know, because I wasn't sure from what you said as if DEP approved it for cover, if we had to use it, as opposed to we're with the people who run the landfill, and it's always on our discretion as to how we're going to run the landfill.
It's our discretion of how we run the landfill, because
that's clear in the contract.
It's clear in the contract, because what we wanted to do is, yes, we want to make the availability for us to take the ash. However, it's our landfill. This is ash that hasn't even been produced yet in terms of material from our county on a full-scale process. So until that ash is produced, it's tested, data is provided to us, data is provided to DEP, future aspects of impacts about leachate, potential impacts to leachate. So we basically put in provisions that protect us, that it is we will take it if it meets certain criteria, but it is our discretion that if it prohibits operations, or if it in any way causes impacts to our landfill, then we have a discretion not to accept the ash.
Okay, and the ash not for cover has a charge of $18.46. And I was wondering why that charge would be less than we charge for C and D, especially when you consider that about 3/4 of this ash is going to be generated from material which comes out from outside of Indian River County. And that's something I had discussions yesterday, but never really, I mean, for me at this point, that fee for ash for not for cover is too low. And I'll just throw that out there. And that's, since our discussions yesterday,
The 1846 per ton was constructed in a way that was to recover the district's marginal cost to landfill additional material in the Class 1 landfill. It includes our contractor processing costs to Republic, which we pay $13.99 a ton for. It includes a factor for building the landfill cells and the closure, also the long-term care builds in the cost of the land that was acquired and all the support facilities and an administrative charge of about 10, our G&A charge is slightly over 10%. So that's how we developed that 1846.
Okay, and the point there being is I always thought that we should be getting the full cost as opposed to the marginal cost. So I'm just tossing that out there. For me, at the present Hamashi, that's all my questions. Anybody else have any questions for Hamashi at this time? Okay, next up. Dude.
So good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the commissioners this morning. For the record, my name is David King. I'm the president of NES New Planet Bioenergy, reside at 4107 Deltawood Court in Houston, but presently in the process of relocating here to Indian River County.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to first start by apologizing to the Commission relative to the timing concerns that were raised by Commissioner Solari. I also appreciate the efforts of staff in the County Attorney's Office and the County Administrator in order to move this forward, as well as the Bob Keating's group in the Permitting Division as we've tried to maintain schedule and progress the project. Also appreciate the fact that the Board of County Commissioners would have liked to have more time to digest the agreement, but I can say that there's been quite a bit of work, some pretty intense and challenging discussions as we work through this to get the agreement that we have today. What I'd like to talk about today, it's a great opportunity as we're talking about the feedstock, is provide a little bit of a summary as to where we are from a project standpoint. And I'm going to provide maybe 8 months of intense construction activity into 3 or 4 slides. I'd also talk about local involvement. I see that we have some people here today from the Economic Development Division, as well as some local contractors, as well as some of the educational liaisons that we've been doing as we progress the project as well. Talk also about the benefits to Indian River County from a larger picture than just the feedstock contract. So this is probably the nicest picture you're going to find of an abandoned juice plant that had been ravaged by 4 hurricanes and left idle. That is what the project looked like as we started it. Since then, Hamachi, if you would, we have been actively working to reclaim material as we work through this and demolish the plant. In fact, we were able to recycle over 85% of the material that was demoed out as part of the project, and that went towards the county's recycle efforts as well. So that's just a picture of some tanks being removed. This is probably a more dramatic picture of the entire demolition that we had to do with buildings and equipment. This picture I put in there for the purposes of showing what the site looked like after complete demolition, and you can see there's really only 4 buildings that remain. The administrative building on the top of there. There's a feedstock building, which I'll show you in a moment, its present status, a warehouse building, and a small maintenance shop. I draw your attention to the lower half of the facility, which is where we had a concrete milling operation where we were able to fully utilize all the concrete that we had demoed out in order to provide the base and also the road ballast for the site right now. So we've been able to recover almost all those piles there with the exception of 1 or 2. We've got some big activity going on. This is just a picture of the stormwater pond under construction. Some major involvement from an engineering standpoint, but also this work here was done by a local firm, South Bay Builders. They did a lot of the site excavation and did the civil work as well. And this is as the site looked at about a week ago, where we stripped down the feed building, and so all that cladding that was damaged by hurricane is gone. We've got our stormwater ponds in. This is a picture of the east stormwater pond. But all of the civil work has pretty much been done. And on this next slide that I have, It's not a very good resolution. I apologize for that. I had to take it from the site webcam, but the purpose of showing you this was basically to illustrate that we've actually started pouring concrete, that we've got steel on site. That was 2 milestones that we achieved last week, and we're continuing to work with the permitting department. When the question was asked around permitting, right now we've been working through our building permits for each of the individual areas as we move them forward, and developing a plan with the planning department to get all those permits issued. So some pretty significant work has been done in the last 8 months, pretty intense efforts from an engineering standpoint, but also more recently from a construction standpoint. And it's really exciting to see that we're starting to get some activity at the site. So if we go back to that, Himanshu, I think you've seen this picture before, but we're well on our way to developing this project, as you see before you here in this representation. We have a little bit more detail later on, but the bottom line is that we would expect to be mechanically complete in the second quarter of next year, start the commissioning activity, and producing product in the second half of next year. So pretty aggressive time frame. Just as a bit of a recap, the project is an industrial biotechnology facility. We'll produce 8 million gallons of advanced bioethanol using the INEOS technology. As Himanshu mentioned, this will be the first commercial scale facility in the world. It will also develop 6 megawatts of renewable power. We contemplate that we will be using about 4 of that to run the plant, and about 2 megawatts that we put on the grid, which is enough to power approximately 1,500 homes. We have that agreement in place with FPL now. The source of the feedstock is renewable biomass. To a large part extent, it's the vegetative and yard waste that we talked about with the Board of County Commissioners in terms of scope roughly 15, 18 months ago. And as a result of that, the total feedstock to the plant, Indian River County, bearing in mind the mulch take that the county requires, will comprise about 30% of that, with other counties, other sources, non-county sources within Indian River County accounting for about 70% of that. And of course, as we talked about, the landfill gas is a critical part of the agreement as well. We have all our key state, federal, and local permits. We redeveloped the site, as I mentioned, 85% of the material reviewed. Our final engineering should be done in July, and so that whole project team will be moving on site. Some of them have already. Of course, many of you are at our groundbreaking in February of this year. First steel and concrete has been put in place at the site. We've procured over $34 million in equipment, and proud to point out that 80% of that, with the exception of some very sophisticated pieces of equipment, 80% of that has been sourced in the U.S. We expect to do the roads, the concrete, the electrical, basically the infrastructure, and be working on that in this quarter or next quarter. Most of the equipment, the major equipment, will be arriving in the fall of this year, and as I mentioned, will be mechanically complete in the second quarter of next year, hopefully in April. The timeline just represents this. I think it's just important to note that we've got an 18-month horizon from when we originally had signed a deal with our EPC contractor right through to when we expect it to be handed over and be producing product in the second half of 2012. Just an example of some of the subcontracts that we've awarded. There's many that have been done here in Florida. I've got a little bit of detail here in terms of some of the specific contractors that we've used. But Himanshu, if you go to the next page, maybe to try to characterize that a little bit, you'll see that we've got the shovel-ready project. It's now underway. We've redeveloped an old industrial site. We've got a $130 million investment, well on our way towards spending that. Anticipate 175 to 200 construction jobs at full manpower, creating 52 full-time jobs. We've got the hiring underway. I was mentioning to people this morning, I've got 2 people that have joined as of yesterday on my team, which is going to be very helpful in terms of moving the project forward. In sum, probably about $3 million plus in payroll for the people that will be hired permanently. We've also anticipated, calculated I should say, almost 400 jobs total in terms of the total engineering, construction, and operating efforts here. And we estimate that through May of this year, we've actually accomplished about 175 of those. Certainly in terms of benefits to the county, this facility of this size and of this magnitude in terms of dollars adds to the tax base and supports school and the local government. And one of the things that sometimes we don't talk about is just the significant ancillary economic benefit of having this facility being the showcase for a global effort in technology licensing and the amount of activity that that'll bring to to Indian River County. Through the multiplier that's generated by the Department of Energy and others for a biofuels operation, somewhere between 3 and 5 jobs that have a ripple effect in the economy. So you can total that to about 1,500. Certainly rural unemployment is pretty high at 12.2%, although it's down a little bit from 3 or 4 months ago. Our construction spend to date here on site since we've active, so between the demolition activity and the construction activity, excavation, site prep, etc., has been almost $9 million. Of that, we've spent about 3.5 here in Florida, and of that we've spent 1.7 million, and that's actually just through May on local in the local economy using local contractors from Indian River County. We've also been pretty active with Indian River State College to develop a curriculum that will not only educate students in terms of what technology is all about, but perhaps prepare them for positions with the company as well. And we've had 3 or 4 sessions in that regard. We hope to tune that up so that basically at the end of it, we will have what will be a basic operator and technical training for people that will suit them very well, not only for our facility, but for the industry in general. We've had also some recruitment discussions with NASA and U.S. Space Alliance because we understand the impact there that's having in the Treasure Coast as well. We've had some very good discussions with them. We hope to be able to find some good people that are interested in leading edge technology and move their expertise from one leading edge to the next. Certainly from an environmental standpoint, from an energy standpoint, this is more productive use of local waste and the landfill gas than is presently being utilized. And the bottom line is we consider this to be a win-win, probably a win-win-win for the community as well as ourselves to be here active in Indian River County. In conclusion, we've talked about this paradigm shift, this waste to sustainable bioenergy. Our technology is a sustainable solution. It's a step-changing greenhouse gas emissions. We've talked about that before. It's a new direction for residential waste, including ag and vegetative waste. A real option to advance energy independence locally and nationally. It has significant community impact. We consider this to be an economic engine for Indian River County in terms of not just economic, but environmental and energy drivers. The jobs that are going to be created, good jobs that are going to be created, the tax base that is expanded as a result of the facility that we have in place as well, and the ripple effects that we see forthcoming from having this type of plant in this location as we go to licensing our technology globally. So I appreciate your time.
Any questions for Mr. King? I've got 2 if I could. Just one picky-uni one on the contract. There's a point under delivery of acceptable waste, which is provision B. You're probably not going to remember, so I'll read you the provision when you get to 6. It says, the district shall comply with all applicable safety procedures and regulations established from time to time by the company. And I was wondering why it shouldn't be something like the district shall comply with all reasonable applicable safety procedures. And the reason being, the reasonable is in there a number of times, especially when it's for something which protects your side. And it just struck me that's usually a word that's in almost all of these safety procedures, because without that word reasonable, then it's the district shall comply with whatever we say, period.
It's a great question. Actually, reasonable was in there originally. One of the hallmarks, Commissioner Solari, of INEOS and in my professional career has been the utmost respect for driving the safety performance of our operation. We don't think the safety procedures, or environmental for that matter, that we put in place will be unreasonable, but it's very important that people that come onto our site agree to the performance and the procedures that we have on our site, not only for their own protection, but it provides a degree of consistency with the various entities that will be on site. So having a standard to which all people subscribe to and perform to is the appropriate thing to do, and that's why we put all applicable safety procedures.
Well, absolutely, but I would expect that they'd be all reasonable safety procedures. So anyway, I would certainly like to see that in the contract. I can't understand why you'd have any objection to it being there. The other thing is, we're talking about the economics of all this, and for a long time we never got any real finances from you or anything like that. So I was wondering at this point if we had any idea of how much actual private sector money is involved in this project.
So we have a very acute amount of private sector because, as you know, we've got a grant from the DOE, which is a matching $50 million grant from the Department of Energy, and the processes in place to ensure that that's spent responsibly have taken up a lot of time in terms of making sure we have the diligence. Beyond that, all the rest of the money to this point has actually come from the two joint venture partners.
Okay, so if you say there's a $50 million match, is that match then with all private sector funds and not from any of the U.S. Department of Agriculture loan guarantee?
Correct.
Okay, so it is an extra $50 million on top of the loan guarantee and the U.S. Department of Energy grant?
The private sector money, yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
That wasn't clear to me. That makes me feel better about things. Thank you very much. Commissioner Fletcher?
Thank you. David, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for what you have done, the good citizen in this community. Even though you hang your hat in Texas, you're coming aboard. And we, since our first discussion in the old building, when I said, "You're going to what?" And you've grown to explain. You've been an element of commitment. Everybody in your team has been an element of pure commitment. And really, you've gained that trust. You've gained that understanding. And I've even watched the educational endeavors now matriculating, if you pardon the expression. I think that you're growing exponentially before the project is built. And your buy local philosophy, when you said we're going to try to use as many people in this community and put them to work, you've done that. You clearly show it, but we hear it on a daily basis. And it's great to have you aboard. I'm very impressed that we will be placed on the map by INEOS technology. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to move this staff recommendation forward for the agreement. I believe that it needs to state that we will approve it in substantial form and with the attached feedstock agreement, and authorize the chairman to sign the executed agreement upon final direction from the county attorney.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fletcher.
I'll second the motion.
We have a second from Commissioner O'Brien. Any discussion?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis.
I guess I'm really not too concerned about the actual operation itself. I think that y'all have covered it, and quite frankly, you know, I wish you the best, and you know, be a team player on this thing as best we possibly can. But just, I guess, maybe turning to the last page of a book that doesn't end quite so well. And my question is really of the staff sitting in front of us. What if at the end of this, or in a year, 2 years, that they wind up not being profitable? I mean, it's nice to be green and everything, but ultimately, if you're not profitable, you're not going to stay in business. And so where does that leave the taxpayers? Where does that leave this commission? If they were to close their doors and give it a month, 5 months, a year, you just pick your time frame on this agreement, where does that leave us?
You know, that's a good question, and obviously we've struggled with this issue throughout the last year and a half, almost 2 years of working with New Planet Energy and then INPP. Basically, the way the contract's currently structured, it really is set up for two parts. It's set up for feedstock, as we've discussed, it's set up for the landfill gas. If for whatever reason, during the period of this 20-year contract, INPB, for whatever reason, becomes insolvent and no longer can move forward on this process, the easiest part of our landfill element to make changes back to the existing parameters is the vegetative waste. Sometime back last year, we had a meeting with the commission, and we talked about we're going to make a transition away from utilizing C&D and household generated waste as part of their feedstock. Once we did that, we protected our operations, our long-term operations with the landfill. So if for whatever reason something were to change, we could jump back into the process of basically going back into the vegetative waste system, just like we did before, no harm, no foul. The other part of the process would be that we would simply cut off the landfill gas processing at the point of interconnect that we have with them, and nothing would prevent us from going forward with a new contract with somebody else as we had in the original RFP like that. So the biggest single issue that we were concerned about at the very early on was what would be the effects long-term on the operations of the landfill, because if for whatever reason we changed the operation of the landfill that prevented Republic now currently, or Waste Management prior, and they walked away, and for us to have to come back and restart that would be catastrophic. We've protected that into the system for this 20-year agreement, so it's fairly easy to go back into catching back up again. We've dealt with the issues related to, concerns originally with staff as part of the privatization, so again, a second part of the protection like that.
I guess then kind of my next area of concern, and if we're going to be looking at bringing 70% of this type of debris in from other communities, I really do wish that there was a way that we could address and I guess maybe put an exclamation point on the Oslo Road interchange with if we're looking at a $130 million facility by the time we get done, with one that has, from what we're being told, so much support from the state, local, as well as federal government. There really ought to be some kind of bite or impetus to be able to get that interchange in there and use this as a springboard to make it happen. And I don't know whether we're taking full advantage of that, even with some of these other people. I mean, it's going to be crucial to your business plan, it appears to me. And you're talking about a good, probably a 5-mile stretch of 2-lane road that right now, by the way, the bridge doesn't work, so you can't bring heavy trucks down it. And I know it's not going to stay that way, but just from your supply line and looking at it from that, I don't know how we could help with that or use this as a springboard to make that happen even more. But I think this might be an opportunity for us just to push one last time, one more direction.
Just, Commissioner Davis, DOT does have in their work plan funds to go through the interchange justification process again.
Yeah.
And they're well aware of the potential increased traffic from the bioenergy plant, and that's one of the stepping stones of coming back with the justification report is not only the raw material traffic, but also the end product traffic. Certainly should give good reason to have an interchange there. So I know DOT has funding to move that justification report forward again, and hopefully that'll be the deciding point to authorize it.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm just going to make a couple comments because I'll be voting against this, but I want to try to be clear as to why I'm voting against it. I've been from the very beginning extremely supportive of the ENEOS project, and I still want to make it clear I'm very supportive of the ENEOS project. But I think there are two different things here, and one is the project itself and the economic development issues involved, of which I'm fully supportive. The second, though, is the contract with the solid waste disposal district, which is somewhat different. And I may have a sort of idiosyncratic view of our solid waste disposal district and our other utilities, which is a little different from our other commissioners. I've always viewed them as having a certain model, which is to serve the customers and protect the natural resources. And I believe that's particularly important with our water and sewer utility, and should be important here. And I also note that, but I think that's a model we ought to keep. But the county, I think, has been extremely supportive in terms of economic development. I mean, when this first came before us almost 2 years ago, we had ENEOS had said that we were going to get, well, the proposal we got was going to have about a $2 million value to the county, and that was tremendous. But today, the value is about zero in terms of the charts that we get from Hamashu. But in that intervening time, we've implemented a much improved jobs credit and a tax abatement, which has a value of around $3.7 million to ENEOS over a 10-year period. and I am fully supportive of that and have absolutely no hesitations with that, and I have no hesitations with the project itself, so I just want to make that clear. My problem is with the just solid waste disposal district contract, I find it one-sided, and I almost have the feeling that it's being used as more of a economic development tool than as following the model of something that's designed to provide a service for the customers while protecting our natural resources. So I just wanted to clarify that without trying to make too big of a deal of it. So, if there are no more comments, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just Joe or Alan, do you have any final comments to add?
No.
Alan, are you good with the terms of the contract? Other than Himanshu referred to a couple minor...
Yeah, there were some minor items which none of them are significant, and they're included within the motion that's on the floor right now.
Okay.
I think the contract from a legal standpoint, I don't get involved much in the numbers, but I get involved in the structure of the contract, and one of the primary things that I'm looking at is from the public standpoint, I don't want to get us into a box that over a 20-year term starts to turn sour and we can't get out of it. That was my biggest concern. And when I say sour, I'm talking about we start losing money on the deal. So, we structured it in such a way that it has what I'll call the most favored nation pricing. It has the 7-year true-ups, for lack of a better word. I felt in the end that the structure we came up with was a good structure. So I felt good about the structure of the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Pleasure.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Dave, one final thought. These numbers are based upon about 10 to 20% of full maximum potential of what you anticipate the site to actually be capable of?
We certainly have the footprint to get larger at the site, yes.
So that would explain the difference in numbers from your initial presentation to what you've done based upon the available feedstock.
Absolutely. The original response by NP contemplated a much larger project. When we formed the joint venture, our board was considering that we would have a smaller demonstration type project, and in conjunction with staff, we looked at that. Most of our experience was on vegetative and wood waste. There was the comments that Eric made earlier in terms of that being a good fit for the county in terms of exposure relative to the other agreements, and that's why it was voted, I guess it was March of '09, to just restrict the volume, or restrict the plant actually to vegetative waste. But clearly our intent, and we have this in our permit, is to be able to experiment with other materials in order to demonstrate the technology in order to grow the footprint for plants.
But even with the vegetative waste, this has an expandable waste to it.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. That's Solari dissenting. It passes 4-1. Thank you very much, Mr. King.
Thank you.
And I believe that is it.
I would like just to congratulate our little bit of victory, I'd say, down with the Florida Inland Navigational District with securing grant. Mr. Nixon, from what I gathered from the newspaper article, did a phenomenal job, and we've got the funding. Now we just need the permit.
For what, Commissioner Davis?
For the Oslo boat ramp.
So the public can...
Yes, absolutely. This is for the Oslo boat ramp, for the improvements down there, and some of the take care of the road, the sediments, and do appreciate staff's effort in that project.
Thank you very much. If nothing else, we are adjourned.